Chapter 170. After Fan Xian left the Tongfu Tavern, the four scholars in the room looked at each other. It seemed that they had never imagined that such a big piece of cake would fall from the sky and fall on their heads. What do we do now? Yang Wanli sat on the bed, somewhat stupefied. After Cheng Jialin and Shi Chanli congratulated him, they laughed. From now on, Brother Yang, you have the support of the Prime Minister and the Minister of Revenue. I'm afraid your career will be smooth sailing. Yang Wanli's simple and honest face showed a hint of bitterness. I have always admired Sir Fan's talent in learning. This spring examination was also thanks to him, making an exception. I presume that Sir Fan also put in a lot of effort to mark the papers behind the scenes. Only, I wish that Sir Fan had not made this trip today. Cheng and Shi were speechless. They knew that Yang Wanli felt that Fan Xian had done him a favor. Ho Jichang, who had always been the hidden leader of the group, smiled and shook his head. If Sir Fan had done him a favor, he would not have come in person. Wanli, you worry too much. I have decided that from now on in the court, I will think of Sir Fan as my idol. I will make a name for myself. Shi Chanli was stunned. Why had Ho Jichang, who had always prided himself on being virtuous, suddenly changed his temperament? Yang Wanli shook his head and said, I also know that in every exam, teachers and students are the norm. But as you know, Brother Ho, I have always respected Sir Fan Jr.'s talent in learning, because of the item I carried on my person, and because I like Sir Fan Jr.'s personality. I always hoped that Sir Fan Jr. would be different from these court officials. I've asked for perfection, I've asked for perfection. Cheng Jialin scolded him. Although Sir Fan has the talent of poetry, he is still an official of the court, and the son of a noble. It is not easy for him to come here in person. Brother Wanli, do you hope that Sir Fan is a true immortal, who does not eat the food of common mortals? Besides, a true immortal is not necessarily better for this impoverished mortal world than a capable official who is good at scheming. Shi Chanli clapped his hands in praise. Brother Jialin, although you are a man of few words, your words today are very clear. He turned to Yang Wanli and said, if we are talking about admiration, Wanli, you definitely cannot compare to me. I often hold the Bangxian's high poetry anthology in my hands, and can recite the hundreds of poems inside like the back of my hand. However, seeing Sir Fan Jr. today, I am not at all disappointed. Why? It is all because poetry speaks from the heart. Sir Fan Jr. is indeed a free and easy person of my generation. How can he be compared to those corrupt officials in court? He smiled and continued, when I brought the roast chicken here earlier, there weren't many people holding umbrellas in the alley. I'm a person who likes to play around. Looking at the young man under the umbrella, his face was delicate and pretty, his breath was fresh and pleasant, and his comments were somewhat novel and frightening. Therefore, I recklessly crawled under his umbrella and walked all the way here. If it was any other powerful official, how could they tolerate my rudeness? Sir Fan Jr.'s face was full of smiles. Traveling with me, there was not a trace of unnaturalness in his expression. In the inn, I found out that he was Fan Xian. To tell the truth, I was pleasantly surprised. Fan Xian, you really didn't disappoint me. Only now did everyone realize that there had been such a thing. No wonder Fan Xian had said that he and Shi Chanli were fated. Thinking of the feeling, they couldn't help but smile. Yang Wanli scratched his head awkwardly. Maybe, I just feel a sense of nirvanic disillusionment. I've always felt that Sir Fan Jr. should be the kind of person who sits idle on a grape rack, writes thousands of poems, and doesn't care about the filthy matters of the court. Ho Jichang shook his head in disapproval. That kind of person seems elegant and refined, but he's really useless to the country, and of no benefit to the people. If Sir Fan really was like that, I would actually look down on him. Not necessarily. Yang Wanli sighed. Ho Jichang smiled lightly. I'm not afraid of being laughed at. But how can a scholar serve his country? The only way is to enter the court and become an official. But how can outsiders like you and I understand the mysteries and terrors of the court? So Sir Fan Jr. came today not because he needs us, but because he knows that we need him. He paused, then continued. Although I have some pride, I'm not a pedantic person who doesn't know when to advance or retreat. Since we have this opportunity, of course we must seize it. If we must follow someone in the court, then I think that Sir Fan is the best choice. I think that in the future, his achievements in the court will not conflict with our daily ideals." Everyone asked in unison why. Everyone was a little puzzled by Ho Ji-chung's resolute attitude. Hearing him emphasize it now, they became even more curious. Ho Ji-chung picked up his teacup from the table and looked at the remnants of Fan Xian's tea. He was a little lost in thought. After a while, he said, "A popular person of the court on a rainy day would actually take care that the water on his umbrella wouldn't drip into the pot of a street vendor sheltering from the rain. He would rather get himself wet than lean to the side. Such a considerate and kind person. If he isn't a great villain, then he's a great sage." He smiled. "A 17-year-old youth can't hide it so well at any time, so I believe that Sir Fan Jr. is a great sage. My judgment is that simple, because I was moved by that scene in the rain." The room was silent. After a long time, there was a sigh. The next day, on the red wall to the left of the exam hall, the yellow paper that the examinees had been waiting for was finally pasted. The rules for selecting scholars in the Kingdom of Qing's spring examination were not complicated. After the provincial examination was the general examination, and after the general examination, the top 3 candidates would be chosen. However, there was no ranking, and they were arranged according to the strokes on the imperial list. The number of people in the top 3 varied from year to year, because there had been an additional examination in the 3rd year of the Qing calendar. The number of candidates in the next 2 years was a little low. This year, there were only 108 names on the imperial list. Because there were so few candidates, whether it was the students of the Imperial College in the capital, or the scholars from various counties, who had come to the capital to take the exam, they were all nervous and uneasy. To the west of the examination hall was a bridge. If one wanted to look at the results under the Vermilion Wall, they had to cross the bridge. At this time, the area under the Vermilion Wall was already surrounded by students wearing long gowns. The crowd was moving, and they were nervously searching for their names on the big yellow paper. On the other side of the bridge, Ho Ji-chung and Yang Wanli, who had already taken the medicine to calm their hearts, walked slowly. The bridge was still stained with yesterday's rain, and the moss between the bricks was particularly slippery. The 4 of them walked that way, and Cheng Jialin almost slipped, which made the crowd laugh. Cheng Jialin laughed at himself. Although his and Shi Chanli's steps were as slow as his 2 friends', they couldn't help but be nervous deep down. Coming to the red wall, the 4 of them squeezed through the crowd with great difficulty. They began to look from the left side, and after who knew how long, they suddenly heard Shi Chanli cry out in joy, "Brother Ho, Brother Ho! Got it! Got it!" The other 3 heard the sound and hurried to Shi Chanli's side. Sure enough, they saw Ho Ji-chung's name on the 3rd row above their heads. They couldn't help but feel excited. Yang Wanli lightly punched Ho Ji-chung's shoulder, his face full of smiles. Ho Ji-chung smiled slightly, wanting to show a trace of pride, but this was a big deal. Although he considered himself virtuous, thinking of the 10 years of hardship he had suffered, the ardent expectations of his parents at home, and the envious gazes of the scholars around him, he couldn't help but feel a little smug. He couldn't help but open his mouth, revealing an extremely happy smile. At this time, the 3 golden words Ho Ji-chung on the imperial list seemed to shine in the sunlight, appearing incomparably precious, and with a limitless future. The 4 of them no longer separated, and simply looked carefully to the right. After who knew how long, they finally succeeded in finding Yang Wanli's name on the imperial list. Only now did they truly believe what Sir Fan Jr. had said the day before. Yang Wanli saw that his name was indeed on the imperial list, and he was extremely excited. His eyes were a little red, and he mumbled to himself, "I really got it, I really got it." He suddenly let out a strange cry and rushed out of the crowd. He ran to the side of the bridge and roared at the water below. His voice reverberated through the bridge, making a buzzing sound. The 3 friends looked at him with smiles, knowing why he was so excited. Yang Wanli lost his mother when he was 8, and grew up alone in Xuanzhou. It was all thanks to his father, who endured the cold and hunger to buy him a lot of books, and urged him to enter the family school. He endured the supercilious look and studied, and with great difficulty, passed the provincial exams and came to the capital. But after a month in the capital, young Wanli discovered that he should have been talented, and that his reasoning was more practical than other scholars. Unfortunately, the He family mountain was far away, and the family school was simple and crude. He never learned the flourishing rhetoric of the scholars in the capital, and his essays were always dry and unattractive. So even his close friends, Ho Jicheng and Shi Chanli, thought he couldn't get it. Young Wanli himself didn't have much hope, so he spent the last of his silver to buy the most popular shirt among the students, and put Shi Chanli's essay in it. He wanted to gamble. He didn't expect that before he even entered the examination hall, he would be dragged out by the scholar Fan Xian. At the time, young Wanli was devastated. He had thought that his 10 years of hard work had been wasted, and he didn't expect that Sir Fan Jr. would give him a second chance. After the examination, he left the hospital and didn't dare to use the notes in his shirt. Naturally, the essays he wrote were not brilliant, and so he gave up on the idea of writing. He just drank and made merry. Only when he heard that Minister Gua had been imprisoned did he smile a little more. He didn't expect that Sir Fan Jr. would personally come to Tongfu Tavern to see him, and secretly mention that he might enter the top 3. After sorrow came joy, and after despair came hope. This kind of emotional impact continued until today. After young Wanli crossed the bridge and stood under the red wall, he increasingly felt that Sir Fan Jr.'s visit yesterday was a dream, and that he couldn't have gotten it. But he really did get it. Young Wanli looked at his slightly twisted face in the rippling water, and calmed down a little. Naturally, he understood why he had been so lucky in a few short days, and he was very grateful to that young man. Chapter 171. None of the scholars noticed young Wanli's deranged actions. Even the citizens of the capital, who were passing by on the other side of the river, did not look over curiously, because in the capital, this kind of scene was all too common, especially when the results of the spring examinations were released. Near the vermilion wall of the examination hall, there would always be many madmen appearing out of nowhere. At this moment, the scholars on the other side of the bridge all had strange expressions on their faces. Some were excited, some were dejected. Those who had made it looked up to the sky and cried out, while those who had not made it hit the ground with their heads. There were all kinds of expressions, and it was indescribably comical. There were even more miserable scholars who wailed incessantly, hugging the large locust tree next to the vermilion wall, and rubbing their faces against it. No matter how hard their companions pulled, they would not let go, until their cheeks were bleeding. They looked incomparably wretched. The kingdom of Qing used the imperial examinations to select scholars, and those who were not from high clans could not be granted any imperial examinations. So for ordinary commoner scholars, the release of the results of the spring examinations was the only way they could change their lives. This kind of pressure and motivation was enough to turn a gentle and refined scholar into a deranged madman. Compared to those scholars who were kneeling on the riverbank and praying to the heavens, thanking the heavens for allowing them to make it, young Wanli had only shouted twice, and it was indeed rather dull. Of course, this highlighted the steadiness of Ho Jicheng and the other two. By the time young Wanli had regained his composure and was happily walking back to the vermilion wall, his 3 friends had already carefully examined the entire imperial proclamation. Unexpectedly, Shi Chanli had not made it onto the list. What made everyone disappointed and somewhat happy was that Cheng Jialan's name had shockingly appeared in the last row. Cheng Jialan's face was full of uncontrollable excitement, but seeing Shi Chanli's slightly disappointed expression, he could not show it too much. He comforted him. "If you don't make it this time, come back next year." This was a very old-fashioned comforting phrase, but under these circumstances, it seemed to be the only old-fashioned thing to say. Shi Chanli laughed bitterly. Looking at the despondent examinees around him who had failed, he forced himself to raise his spirits and smiled. "This time, 3 out of the 4 of us have made it, which is already a great thing. Compared to the previous year's spring examinations, this year's list is much fairer. As for me, I'll have to reconsider." Ho Jichang nodded and gently patted Shi Chanli on the shoulder. He knew that although Shi Chanli was the most carefree of the four, the blow he had taken today was not small. He changed the subject and smiled. I don't know how Sir Fan Jr. did it to protect so many people. I see that the rankings are different from previous years. There are more names with real talent, and there are fewer stupid and incompetent people who rely solely on their family background. It must have something to do with the Overwatch Council's investigation of the exam hall fraud. At this moment, the few of them had already walked to a quiet place by the riverbank and sat down. Their voices were still very soft, afraid that they would cause trouble for their fellow disciple Master Xian. Ho Jichang shook his head. Although many officials were arrested this time, other than a few Jiangnan scholars, no other scholars were exposed. From this, it can be seen that before the Overwatch Council acted, Sir Fan Xian had already made arrangements. He shook his head with a bitter smile and sighed. He thought that young Sir Fan really did have a strong background to be able to do something like this during the national ceremony. But it seemed that he had not misjudged Fan Xian. This year's list was much fairer. The four of them chatted about the situation in the capital. Over the past 2 days, there had been many officials who had fallen from grace. Everyone in the officialdom was in danger, but Fan Xian looked very confident. At this moment, Shi Chanli, who had been silent all this time, suddenly opened his mouth. I think that Sir Fan has something to do with the scandal being exposed. The other three were shocked. If that is true, then Sir Fan is even more amazing than we thought. Of course, Fan Xian had something to do with the scandal at the exam hall, but the Overwatch Council had acted appropriately. Although Guoyu, the director of the Board of Rights, had fallen, the Eastern Palace had not suffered too much damage. So for the time being, the Crown Prince was only suspicious of Fan Xian. And in this list, the Eastern Palace still had 3 people they needed, compared to the Great Prince and the Bureau of Military Affairs. This was a very good result. Fan Xian sat in his study, looking at the list that Wang Qinian had copied out. He frowned slightly. The capital had not been peaceful for the past 2 days. The chief official Guoyu, a teacher, and a supervisor had all been invited to tea by the Overwatch Council. As for Fan Xian, as the examiner of the spring examination, he had been in charge of the crucial step of sealing the names. Yet nothing had happened. It was inevitable that some people would begin to speculate. But he was also somewhat happy. Of the students he favored, aside from Shi Chanli, who had a personality that he liked the most had successfully entered the list. As for the results of the court examinations, that would depend on their luck. There was really nothing he could do to help. As he left the study, he saw a green silhouette walking toward him. Fan Xian let out a cry and prepared to hide in his room. He cried bitterly in his heart. Who would have thought that his father would come to his courtyard today? Count Sinan Fan Jian was now the official minister of revenue, but his stern face had not changed much. He coldly pushed open the door to his son's room, which had not been closed in time. He stepped in and sternly shouted, "You went out again yesterday?" Fan Xian smiled bitterly and bowed. "Father, it was raining in the capital last night, so I wanted to go for a walk." "How many people did you think you could hide your visit to Tongfu Tavern?" Fan Jian sat down. Lin Wanner, who was in a side room, heard the noise and rushed over. She hurriedly called for a maid to bring her master tea. Fan Jian looked at his daughter-in-law warmly and smiled. He waved his hand, indicating that she should go back to her room to rest. His expression was as cold as ice. "The matters of the exam hall are complicated. You rashly did that, so be it. I asked you to stay in the mansion to avoid this storm. Yesterday, you went to the Tongfu Tavern to see those students. Today, when the imperial proclamation comes out, everyone can see clearly that those students are on the proclamation. How will the world see you?" Fan Xian smiled. "Although I am young, I am still a teacher. It is normal for me to go and see the examinees. As for the list, everyone knows what is going on. Why should I care? But recently, the Overwatch Council has been investigating a case of cheating, and the cause of this matter is the slip of paper you passed to them." Fan Jian coldly said, "And if you are truly working for the country, then you should not have placed your own people in the top 3. If you only wanted to use the spring examinations to cultivate your own power, then you should not have turned against Guo Yu and pulled him down. Count Sinan looked at his young son in front of him. After a long while he sighed. No matter where you are, you have your own set of rules. The officialdom of the capital is even more so. Among officials, there are honest officials and corrupt officials. Among officials, there are slanderous officials and honest officials. These are two distinct paths. If you want to be an honest official, then do not walk the path of slanderous officials. Hearing his father call him by his courtesy name, Fan Xian knew that the old man was indeed angry. He gently replied, I do not want to be an honest official, nor do I want to be a slanderous official. I want to be a powerful official. As soon as he said this, the air in the study suddenly became so cold that it seemed to freeze. After a long while, Fan Jian softly said, A powerful official? What kind of official can be called a powerful official? He shook his head, and a strange smile appeared on his face. The Prime Minister has power, I have power, and Chen Pingping has power. But do you think that just because you're a subject, you can be called a powerful subject? Fan Xian calmly replied, I cannot, because the power lies in the hands of His Majesty. Then what kind of powerful official do you want to be? With power in my hands, there is nothing to worry about, Fan Xian replied sincerely. I want to be a powerful official that even the emperor's family cannot decide whether I live or die, because I have the power to protect myself, but not others. So I need power. Fan Jian looked at his son, and there was a trace of worry in his eyes. Fan Xian smiled helplessly. The reason he had chosen this unusually dangerous and boring path was naturally because of the thick darkness in the depths of his heart. After a long while, a cold light shone in Fan Jian's eyes. In the future, do not make trouble like this. Chen Pingping can protect you for a while, but he cannot protect you forever. So I warn you, do not get too close to the Overwatch Council. Fan Xian lowered his head. I know, so I need you to remind me from time to time. He knew that his father had always been afraid of him taking over the Overwatch Council. But Fan Xian refused to give up. Fan Jian slowly closed his eyes. This time, you handled the matter very poorly. Even if Guo Baoquan spoke up in the palace and let you guess that the Guo family was actually working for the eldest princess, you shouldn't have done it yourself. If you had told me beforehand, with the power of the Prime Minister and I, we could have used the exam hall's fraud case to get rid of him, and we wouldn't be in this predicament. Fan Xian knew that what his father said was right. If he had taken the risk and joined forces with the Overwatch Council to deal with Minister Guo, it would only have led to an open ending. No one knew what would happen next, and the council would have the initiative. He thought for a moment. Actually, this time, I just wanted to do something that I wanted to do. Perhaps this was just a cheap sense of justice that many people disdained, but Fan Xian still retained a little of it. At present, he was only worried about what Chen Pingping had planned. As if he had guessed what his son was thinking, Fan Jian opened his eyes. There was a trace of comfort and worry in his gaze. You can give up on your fantasies. Chen Pingping will certainly let everyone know that this scandal was single-handedly brought to light by the son of the Fan family. Fan Xian smiled bitterly. He knew that his father was right. Chen Pingping was not afraid of the crown prince of the Eastern Palace. As long as he could establish his reputation, as long as he could get closer to controlling the Overwatch Council, he would do anything. Before leaving his son's study, Count Sinan said lightly, In the future, you need to be more mature. You can keep the childish declarations of powerful officials to yourself. There's no need to tell me. Chapter 172. One day at the end of February, a rumor suddenly began to circulate among the officialdom of the capital. The reason why the spring examination fraud case had been so quickly and accurately solved was all because the Overwatch Council had a list of students who had bribed the examinees. And this list had been provided to the Overwatch Council by Master Fan Jr., who was known as the Immortal Poet. It was said that Sir Fan Xian deeply detested the accumulated abuses in the imperial examinations. He was abnormally angry that the diligent scholars of the world could not obtain a fair promotion after 10 years of hard work. That was why he ignored the layers of traps in the officialdom and bravely wrote a memorial to the emperor. He did not hesitate to sell himself to corrupt officials in the court in order to obtain that important list. In short, the rumor was bizarre. It was said that Fan Xian was a man of great wisdom and courage. That list was clearly not a secret, but it was said to be the most sinister piece of paper in Qing officialdom. Fan Xian could tell at a glance that this was the work of those from the 8th Bureau of the Overwatch Council. As soon as this rumor spread, Fan Xian immediately became a thorn in the side of the officials of the Board of Rights, a thorn in the flesh. But on the other hand, his reputation in the eyes of the common people and the scholars of the world took another step forward. Although the Imperial College and the Tunguen Pavilion maintained their silence, Fan Xian had now become the spiritual leader of the scholars. Fan Xian straightened his collar and sleeves. Isn't this leader a little too new? He then gently patted his sister's worried face. What are you worried about? My brother is one of the most powerful princes in Qing. His voice was very soft, and his words were very strange. But Fan Ruoro still understood, even though she did not understand the deeper meaning hidden within. Lin Wanner did not hear. Even if she had, she probably would not have understood. In any case, she was not as worried as her sister-in-law. Smiling, she tied the jade rui that the Empress had given her to her husband's belt. Pretending to dust it, she said, "Come back soon." It was as Count Sinan had said. Fan Xian was too immature and had left behind too many problems. Once the rumor spread, Jingdo was shocked. Everyone's gaze fell on Fan Xian. Although the people behind the officials who had fallen from power because of the corruption case were wary of Fan Xian's background, they still began to move. That morning, a young censor from the Imperial Censorate had already sent a letter to the palace, accusing Fan Xian of fraud and immoral conduct. Fan Xian had left to go to the Ministry of Justice to be tried. Originally, the cheating case had been investigated by the Overwatch Council, but the officials who had suffered greatly from the scandal were not willing to let the Overwatch Council deal with Fan Xian, so they used the Ministry of Justice's route. The Ministry of Justice had never been on good terms with the Prime Minister, nor did they have any friendship with Fan Xian. The Ministry of Justice had never been on good terms with the Prime Minister, nor did they have any relationship with Fan. Fan Xian looked at the serving girl, whom he hadn't seen much in recent days, and laughed. When I was little, I told you that the words "go well" were not very auspicious. Cece pursed her lips and smiled. Then I hope the young master will leave early and return early. All right. Cook a bowl of millet porridge for the young master to drink. Put in some sweet millet from Danzhou. I haven't tasted your cooking in a long time. Fan Xian suddenly turned his head and asked, "How are the things I asked you to copy?" These days, Fan Xian didn't know how to deal with Cece, who had grown up with him. He also didn't want her to continue being a servant girl in the Fan manor, so he arranged for her to go to the study to help him copy books. Cece had rarely spoken to her young master these days, and her heart was naturally uneasy. Hearing her young master's question, she cheerfully said, "I'm almost done copying." "That's good." Fan Xian nodded and walked out. He smiled at his wife and sister. "Look, the servant girl I brought up is different. She's even calmer than you, Ruorwo." Fan Ruorwo whispered worriedly. "That's because Cece doesn't know how serious today's matter is." It was indeed serious. Fan Xian had offended too many people by exposing the corruption case. Seeing how the court officials were willing to go against the Prime Minister and Count Sinan in order to bring him to the Ministry of Justice, it was obvious how serious the matter was. Exiting the main gate of Fan Manor, the usually quiet street in the south of the city seemed very crowded today. The officials from the Ministry of Justice who had come to arrest him had a worried expression on their faces. They hid behind the stone lions like thieves. At the main gate, Fan Xizha was leading a group of guards and servants from Fan Manor, beating up the officials with long brooms in their hands. On the street, many scholars and commoners who had heard that Fan Xian was going to be put on trial had swarmed in. They already knew that Fan Xian had something to do with the scandal that had shaken the capital's officialdom. The commoners' simple minds didn't care about what was behind the scandal. They only knew that Fan Xian was talented, kind and a good man. But a good man was going to be put on trial today, so they all felt wronged on Fan Xian's behalf. Fan Xian stood at the gate and smiled as he looked at the crowd outside the manor. He saw that most of them were young scholars, and he knew that Chen Pingping's trick had worked. He whispered to Teng Zijing, who was beside him, "Where are Shi Chanli and the other 3 now?" According to the young master's orders, they are currently being secretly protected by the Overwatch Council. Sir Wang Qinian suggested that the 4 should be sent to King Jing's manor, lest the court officials use this matter to frame you. But I believe that the young master doesn't want to have anything to do with Crown Prince Jing, so I declined. Teng Zijing replied in a low voice. Fan Xian looked at Teng Zijing with some surprise. He hadn't expected the man to guess the situation he least wanted to see. If he sent the 4 scholars to King Jing's manor, it seemed safe, but in the eyes of the Eastern Palace, exposing the scandal would no longer be purely out of a sense of justice and His Majesty's edict. Instead, it would be to stand on the side of the second prince and attack the crown prince. If that happened, the relationship between him and the Eastern Palace would be irreconcilable. Seeing Fan Xian walk out of the manor gate, the surrounding scholars burst into cheers. They all surged forward and shouted something. It was nothing more than to express their admiration and support for Sir Fan Jr.'s righteous shoulders. Fan Xian smiled like a star from his previous life and waved his hand. He said quietly to Teng Zijing, "The biggest problem with scholars is that they are too simple." Teng Zijing smiled and didn't say anything. Fan Xian suddenly laughed happily. "If there's a chance in the future, do you want to leave the capital and become an official? With the power of your family, it's not a problem to make sure you become a 6th or 7th level parent." Teng Zijing was surprised. Although he had been educated, he had always been a guard. Why did the young master want to become an official? But then he remembered that the young master might need someone he could trust in the provinces of the kingdom of Qing. After a pause he replied, "It's all up to you, young master." "Up to me?" Fan Xian laughed. "It's a pity that the kingdom of Qing doesn't have Bailing County." Fan Xian's face had always been clear and beautiful. Now that he was laughing heartily, it was even more radiant, like a spring breeze. The scholars who had come to support him felt very gratified. The immortal poet Fan Xian should look like this. He rubbed Fan Xijia's head and told his brother not to cause trouble. Only then did he politely bid farewell to the officials of the Ministry of Justice, get into his own carriage, and head for the Ministry of Justice. The crowd gradually dispersed, and the scholars who were rushing to take the exam also chased after the yamen of the Ministry of Justice. No one noticed that Fan Manor's valiant guards were escorting another carriage out of the southern street of the city, heading in the direction of the royal palace. Lin Wanner sat in the carriage. Last night, she and Fan Xian had discussed this in bed. Today, she had to go to the palace to explain things to the Eastern Palace and the other palaces. Elsewhere, Fan Xian was alone. He walked into the main hall of the Ministry of Justice. The hall was a little gloomy. The wind whistled in, and the early spring weather made him feel a little cold. But he still smiled and cupped his hands in salute to the 3 people sitting high above. "Greetings, sir." The spring examination fraud case was a big deal, and Fan Xian was a key figure in it. So other than the Minister of Justice, there were also 2 high-ranking officials from the Supreme Court and the Imperial Censorate. On both sides of the hall, there was a row of officials from the 13 yamens. It was a frightening sight. Fan Xian frowned, realizing that the other party had not replied. After a while, he suddenly heard a shout. The Minister of Justice, Han Jiwei, asked coldly, "Is the person standing in the hall the 5th-level Imperial scholar Fan Xian of the Imperial College?" Fan Xian was no longer the young calf who had just entered Jingdo with a smile on his face in the Jingdo government. He glanced at the minister and lightly said, "That is me. I called you here today to inquire about the spring examination." Fan Xian smiled and said, "As far as I know, the spring examination fraud case was handled by the Overwatch Council by imperial edict. I didn't know the Ministry of Justice was involved." Hearing this rude reply, the 3 officials sitting high above were furious. But they knew that the man in front of them was at the height of his popularity. He had the Prime Minister and a minister behind him. After the fraud case, He had gained the respect of the scholars, so they couldn't do anything to him. The Minister of Justice, Han Jiwei, had always prided himself on being sober and honest. He couldn't stand such arrogance. He snorted and said, "I am handling this case under imperial edict. Don't make excuses." Fan Xian shook his head. "I am not making excuses. I just don't know why you have summoned me here. If you are asking about the details of the spring examination fraud case, I am sorry. The Overwatch Council has strict orders that before the case is closed, I am not allowed to reveal it." The Minister of Justice was so angry that he laughed. "Are you not going to answer the court's questions? The Overwatch Council is a part of the court, and the Ministry of Justice is a part of the court." Fan Xian sighed. "As you know, this matter involves too many people. I really don't know how to handle it. The laws of Qing do not make it clear." Chapter 173. As soon as he opened his mouth, he was met with a soft rebuff. The three ministers felt that they could not ask any more questions. They looked at each other and saw the anger in each other's hearts. This time, Fan Xian had unceremoniously overthrown Guoyu, the director of the Board of Rights, and had angered many officials. Fortunately, most of the officials did not dare do anything for the sake of the Prime Minister and Minister Fan. However, these three lords each had their own backgrounds and plans behind them. After a long time, the Minister of Justice Han Jiwei suddenly asked in a cold voice, "Yesterday, the Imperial Censor reported you. Does Fan Fengjing know about it?" "I know about it, but not the details," replied Fan Xian calmly. Han Jiwei stared into his eyes and said, "Fan Xian, don't rely on your talent and background to be so arrogant. And don't think that I will believe that you are truly doing this for the sake of the country and the people by exposing this scandal. If you do not explain clearly what you did during the spring examination, don't blame me for being rude to you." Fan Xian frowned. "There is something wrong with your words, sir. If I did something during the spring examination, would I be willing to take the risk of reporting this to the court? As for the word filthy, I would like to return it to you." "How dare you?" The three officials rebuked him in unison. In all their years in the capital, they had never seen such an arrogant junior. Han Jiwei was so angry that his beard trembled. "Don't think that all the officials in the capital are afraid of your background. You must know that the reason I was able to rule the Ministry of Justice for 8 years was because of my righteousness, not because of your intimidation tactics." Fan Xian laughed and said, "When investigating a case, we care about the evidence. Who would be as impassioned as you, sir, in expressing your opinions? I truly do not understand." Han Jiwei was so angry that he laughed. Fine. Then let me ask you. On February 16th, did you go to Tongfu Tavern?" Fan Xian knew that he was asking about that rainy day. "Yes," he replied with a smile. "Did you go to see Yang Wanli and the others?" "Yes. Before Yang Wanli entered the palace for the spring examination, did you whisper something to him?" "Yes. As the examiner of this spring examination, you have the heavy responsibility of supervising the examination. Well, let me ask you directly. Did Yang Wanli enter the top 3? "Exactly. On that day, outside the examination hall, there were many witnesses who could prove that you had already found out that Yang Wanli had smuggled drugs into his clothes. Why did you let him into the examination hall?" Fan Xian smiled in his heart. He had long told Wang Qinian to have Yang Wanli destroy the silk robe, so he would not be worried at all. He said, "There is no such thing." "No," Han Jiwei asked angrily. "Exactly." Good. Then let me ask you, that day outside the examination hall, when so many examinees were found to have cheated, did you still let them in?" Fan Xian shivered slightly. He knew that this matter could not even be considered a small matter, but if the other party really did not let it go, it would indeed be troublesome. However, he still calmly replied, "Yes." "All right." Han Jiwei's slightly dark and thin face flashed with some kind of light. He stared into Fan Xian's eyes and said in a cold voice, "Since you've already admitted it, then I can only put you in prison for further investigation." "What did I admit?" asked Fan Xian. Han Jiwei frowned and said coldly, "What I asked you, you admitted it all. This matter is obvious." 5th level official Fan Xian, as the minister of the Spring Breeze residence, secretly colluded with examinees Yang Wanli and others to practice favoritism. He regarded the law as nothing and the emperor's grace as nothing. He is truly audacious. Fan Xian narrowed his eyes at the minister and explained, "When did I admit it? Correct, I did see Yang Wanli on February 16th. That was because I admired his talent and learning. At that time the fraud case broke out. If I really did have the suspicion of favoritism, why would I meet with him on that day? Furthermore, the place of the meeting was at Tongfu Tavern, where all the scholars were gathered. Did I not fear gossip?" He smiled and said, "Since I dared to go, although I do not dare to say that this proves that my heart is pure and clear, how can you conclude that I am colluding with Yang Wanli? As you know, the first time I met with Yang Wanli was outside the examination hall. If you say that I colluded with him beforehand, that would be an injustice. Then how do you explain allowing students to enter the examination hall without permission?" Fan Xian frowned slightly, thinking that too many people had seen, and it was all his fault for not taking the civil examination seriously. That was why he had acted so arrogantly. He shook his head helplessly. "Because I was entrusted by the Overwatch Council to secretly keep an eye on those corrupt officials in the exam hall. So it was not good to lose the big picture because of a little. As for the details, you can send a letter to the Overwatch Council and have them explain in detail." Han Jiwei snorted angrily. The Overwatch Council was His Majesty's secret service. How could he ask? The more he looked at Fan Xian's pretty face, the angrier he became. He pushed the lot pot away and shouted, "Fine, fine, fine. You don't want to admit it. Men, beat this shameless bastard." Don't beat him." Two people in the court said the same thing at the same time. One of them was the junior minister of the Supreme Court. He smiled bitterly as he tried to persuade the Minister of Justice. The young man in front of him was not an ordinary son of a rich and powerful family. He could not be beaten. The nobles behind him only hoped to teach him a lesson and punish him for his crimes. How could they dare to beat him? After Minister Han calmed down a little, he remembered that Fan Xian was not only the son-in-law of the Prime Minister, but also the son of the minister. He was a civil official that His Majesty greatly admired. Furthermore, Han Jiwei was in the territory of the 6 ministries. How could he not know Lin Wanner's identity? After being reminded by his 2 colleagues, Han Jiwei could not help but frown. If he really beat Fan Xian up, he would not be able to explain himself to the other nobles in the palace. Then the 3 of them became curious. Who was the other person who said he could not beat him? The 3 of them looked down the hall and found Fan Xian looking at them innocently. The Vice Minister of the Supreme Court was a little amused. He could not help but ask, "Why not?" Fan Xian explained sincerely, "I am a scholar. According to the laws of Qing, I do not need to kneel. When questioning someone, torture is not allowed. Therefore, I said I could not beat him. Otherwise, if the censor came tomorrow and accused Minister Han of not following the laws of Qing, wouldn't that be my fault?" The imperial censor of the imperial censorate, Guozhang, was actually a distant relative of Guoyu. He was the leader of the group that had submitted the memorial to Fan Xian. Hearing the barbs in Fan Xian's words, he couldn't help but laugh coldly. "Master Fan, you are not only talented, but you are also very familiar with the laws of the Qing kingdom. But do you know that in the first edict of the Qing kingdom, there are 15 major crimes for which the rules you mentioned earlier can be ignored?" Of course, this censor would not actually dare to use torture on Fan Xian, but he was willing to threaten him with words and vent the frustrations of the officials in the capital these days. Fan Xian shook his head, his face still full of innocence. "I still cannot beat him." The Vice Minister of the Supreme Court was the one who had the least involvement in the exam hall scandal. He couldn't help but ask curiously, "This is a serious crime, and Sir Fan Jr. is not willing to defend himself. Why can't he be beaten in court?" Fan Xian still played the trick of using the Overwatch Council. "This involves the secrets of the council," he replied sincerely. "I have not received permission from the relevant officials of the Overwatch Council, so I do not dare to discuss it in detail." The 3 judges looked at each other and saw the fear and anger in each other's eyes. They could not beat him, so how could they make Fan Xian admit to his wrongdoings? Their respective masters were determined to make Fan Xian suffer. There was no reason for them to let him go back to their manners. At that moment, an advisor suddenly ran in through the side curtain with a nervous expression on his face. He leaned over to Han Jiwei, the Minister of Justice, and said something to him. Han Jiwei's expression immediately changed. A cold light shone in his eyes, but there was also a faint trace of fear. Fan Xian narrowed his eyes and looked up. The tyrannical Jinqi in his body had long been activated, but he only heard a few words in Han Jiwei's reply. He faintly heard the words Eastern Palace and ruthless. He did not know who had sent the news, nor did he know what had caused this Minister of Justice to be so uneasy. At the same time, another 2 slips of paper were passed into the hands of the imperial censor, Guozheng, and the junior official of the Supreme Court. Guozheng expressionlessly glanced at the slips of paper, but the junior official of the Supreme Court revealed a shocked expression. After thinking for a moment, he actually stood up and cupped his hands in salute to the 2 sirs beside him, saying, "People have 3 urgent needs. Sirs, please interrogate them first. I will be back soon." Fan Xian's heart trembled. What kind of slips of paper could make this vice minister of the Supreme Court want to run away? Before coming to the Ministry of Justice, Fan Xian had already investigated. The Minister of Justice seemed to be fair and honest, but he was actually a member of the Eastern Palace. The Vice Minister of the Supreme Court had a good relationship with the Qin family of the Bureau of Military Affairs. As for the censor, Guozheng, when he was young, had an unclear relationship with the eldest princess. If Fan Xian did not have the terrifying power of the Overwatch Council, he would not have known about this relationship, which had been hidden for many years. As he was thinking, he suddenly heard a shout in the hall. "Guards! Fan Xian, the Imperial College's official, is roaring in court. This is a case of fraud, and he has committed 15 major crimes. Beat him." Han Jiwei's facial muscles twisted, as if he had made a great decision. The Vice Minister of the Supreme Court had long since slipped away. It seemed that he knew that a dangerous situation was about to occur in the hall of the Ministry of Justice, and his master did not want to offend the Fan family and the Prime Minister. Fan Xian's eyes were cold. He stared into Han Jiwei's eyes and said coldly, "Do you want to confess under torture?" The censor, Guozheng, also had a fierce look in his eyes. He shouted, "Beat him." 2 fire sticks were aimed at Fan Xian's weakest shins. The 13 yamens of the Ministry of Justice were used to this kind of thing. There was no wind when the fire sticks struck, but they were still fierce. Fan Xian's face was frosty, and he did not move or evade. There were 2 cracking sounds, and the trousers on his legs broke into pieces. It was not his shins that had been broken, but the fire sticks had been broken in the middle, revealing a dense wooden stubble. Chapter 174. Fan Xian took a deep breath and let the tyrannical Jinqi in his body slowly circulate. His clothes fluttered, and the rui ornament that the Empress had given him swayed at his waist. He looked coldly at the bailiffs of the 13 yamens, who were closing in on him. He knew that today's events had deviated greatly from his plan, since they dared to not give face to the Prime Minister and his father, and had actually used sticks to beat people. It must not have been as simple as torture. He took 2 steps forward and kicked away the 2 pieces of the stick. He looked coldly at the 2 officials in the hall, who were forcing themselves to remain calm. He knew that he had made a grave mistake. He had forgotten about that crazy woman in the distant fief of Xinyang, but he didn't know whether Han Jiwei was involved because the crown prince was angry at his actions, or because the empress knew something terrible. The Nilan Street murder had happened a long time ago. In the eyes of the people of the capital, Fan Xian was a civil official with astonishing talent for poetry. They seemed to have forgotten that he was also a martial master. Everyone was shocked. They heard the sound of swords being unsheathed. Countless swords were pointed at Fan Xian, who was standing proudly in the hall. The sticks used by the 13 yamens of the Ministry of Justice were specially made. An ordinary 7th-level master would only be able to howl in pain. But who knew that the tyrannical Jinqi in Fan Xian's body was so fierce that he did not dodge or evade the blows. Instead, he took the blows head-on and broke them in half. This scene frightened all the bailiffs of the Ministry of Justice. Only now did they remember that this seemingly weak and beautiful civil official had once cut open the stomach of Cheng Jushu, an 8th-level master of Northern Qi. Dozens of swords had already been unsheathed. In the cold hall of the Ministry of Justice, they gave off a cold light and surrounded Fan Xian. Fan Xian took 2 steps forward, and the dozen swords also took 2 steps back in fear. Fan Xian frowned at Han Jiwei and Guo Zheng. "Have you considered the consequences of your reckless actions?" he asked quietly. Han Jiwei and Guo Zheng felt a chill in their hearts. Although this beautiful young man's words were indifferent, they were incomparably sinister. Although Prime Minister Lin Ruofu's influence in the court had been greatly reduced because of Wu Bowen, he was still the head of all the officials in the Kingdom of Qing. There was also the Minister of Revenue, who had grown up with the emperor. Han Jiwei suddenly felt some regret. He should not have followed the orders of that noble. Because Guo Zheng was angry at Guo Yu's downfall, and because he had the support of the eldest princess, he knew that since the matter had already begun, it naturally couldn't end peacefully. Gritting his teeth, he shouted, "This official is here to investigate the case. What consequences can there be?" Han Jiwei thought that now that things had come to this, there was no room for regret. He steeled his heart and said coldly, "Correct, Sir Fan Jr. If you are willing to admit to your involvement in the spring exam fraud case, naturally there will be no need to use torture. If you are unwilling to admit, according to Qing law, we can use torture." Fan Xian pursed his thin lips and looked at him with a faint smile. 15 great crimes, 15 great crimes. He shook his head and sighed. "If there is a chance in the future, I will have to change the laws of Qing." Who can change the law? Only the emperor, of course. Fortunately, his words were spoken very quietly. Otherwise, if they fell into the ears of bystanders, these words alone would be enough to execute the entire Fan family. Han Jiwei frowned. "Take this criminal official down." As soon as he said this, the officers of the 13 yamens had already surrounded him, swords in hand. There was a whirlwind of blades, and 2 of them were already at Fan Xian's neck, forcing him to submit. Fan Xian snorted coldly. His hands, which had been hidden in his sleeves this entire time, suddenly shot out. They softly and quickly spread out, transforming into 2 streaks of smoke that struck the wrists of the 2 bailiffs who were close to him. Immediately after, he quickly pulled back his fists and lightly pushed them on their chests. This series of actions was too fast, so fast that no one could see them clearly. After a moment, there were 2 snapping sounds, followed by 2 muffled grunts of pain. The snapping sounds came from the officers' wrists being broken. The snapping sounds came from the 2 swords that had been sent flying by the Jinqi. They slanted upwards and stuck deep into the 2 corners of the Ministry of Justice's board. The 2 swords were stuck above the red sun, as if the sun had sprouted 2 horns of a demon. And the 2 officers were gently pushed in the chest by Fan Xian, and their entire bodies flew backwards. They fell onto 2 chairs, smashing them into pieces and letting out 2 muffled grunts. Everyone was shocked. They hadn't expected Fan Xian's strength to be this strong. They unconsciously took half a step back. Guo Zheng was not in a hurry. He smiled at Fan Xian and said quietly, "Beating an officer in public is an additional crime." Han Jiwei understood what he meant. Whether or not they could use torture was a small matter. As long as they could pin the crime on Fan Xian, it would be fine. The more Fan Xian refused to surrender, and the more he resisted, the better. Guo Zheng looked at Fan Xian and smiled. "Young Master Fan, it would be best if you behaved. I know you are skilled in both the pen and the sword, and that it would not be difficult for you to escape from the Ministry of Justice. But do you want to be accused of rebellion and disobedience?" His fingers gently tapped on the chopping board. He was very satisfied with the current situation. He said quietly, "Young Master Fan, if you resist now, it will mean that you have evil intentions. If you do not resist, then be a good boy, and accept your punishment." He added at the end, "If young Master Fan wishes to kill his way out of the Ministry of Justice, please do as you please. But it is a pity. A dignified immortal of poetry, the idol of the scholars, is going to cause unrest in the government and ruin his reputation, because of such a serious crime. Fan Xian looked at him calmly and suddenly said, "Actually, I grew up scared." He was talking about his experience of looking at corpses every day when he was a child. He thought of what Censor Gua had just said, and it really did have some of Stephen Chow's elegance as a ninth-level official. A cold light flashed in his eyes. He knew that he could not kill his way out of the Ministry of Justice, but he did not want to be punished either. So he could only drag it out until the people behind him reacted. He said coldly, "Killing my way out of the Ministry of Justice is a serious crime. Very well, I will stay here and chat with you too." Having said this, he went to the side and sat down on a chair. His eyelids were slightly closed. He said quietly, "If you want to use torture, I will naturally resist. If you do not use torture, I do not mind sitting here a little longer. My two lords, when you are done with the trial, please let me know so I can go home and have some porridge." "What a bold and arrogant person!" Han Jiwei shouted. "Arrest him." This was the third time he had shouted during the trial that day. Fan Xian's face was expressionless. He lightly slapped the tea table next to him, and the tyrannical Jinqi in his palm spread out like a cloud. In an instant, the wooden tea table was smashed into countless pieces. Then he raised his eyes to look at the bailiffs around him. Being swept by his gentle gaze, they thought of the terrifying power this young Sir Fan had demonstrated. None of the bailiffs of the 13 yamens, who were usually not afraid of ghosts or gods, dared to take a step forward. Since the founding of the country, there had never been such an absurd scene in the hall of the Ministry of Justice. It did not seem like something that could happen in real life. It was more like a play that Fan Xian had occasionally seen in his previous life. The criminal being interrogated sat calmly on the chair, and the bailiffs around him did not dare approach. Yet the criminal refused to kill his way out of the Ministry of Justice, and there was nothing they could do about it. In Fan Xian's life, the chair he sat on would always, at the right moment, show his attitude. Perhaps it was anger, or perhaps he was ready to fight back. When he was in Danzhou, when he was 12 years old, he had stepped on a small stool and beaten the second housekeeper to a pulp. On the day he had first entered the capital, he had sat on the chair under the side door, suppressing his anger and preparing to receive the second aunt's gentle words. Today, in the hall of the Ministry of Justice, he was still sitting on the chair, his face calm as he looked at the two high-ranking officials who wanted to use sticks to discipline him. In his heart, he wondered who else was behind this, other than the eldest princess. The Ministry of Justice once again fell into a stalemate. Seeing Fan Xian surrounded by the 13 yamens, Imperial Censor Guo was in no hurry. He knew that Minister Fan Jian and Prime Minister Lin Ruofu had been delayed by other matters today. He had plenty of time to wait for Yang Wanli and the others to come in as witnesses. He smiled. "Tomorrow, I will report what happened today to His Majesty. Let's see if you can still rely on your father's power to be so arrogant. Don't think that I can't convict you." In a moment, when Yang Wanli and the others arrive as witnesses, Minister Han will still arrest you. If you still dare to resist, don't blame the 3 ministers for requesting an edict to punish you for the crime of treason. Fan Xian said quietly, "Sir Gua, since both sides have shed all pretense of cordiality today, I will say this plainly. If Yang Wanli and the others have any problems, you should prepare for your funeral." This was a naked threat. Since the founding of the Kingdom of Qing, Fan Xian was the first person who had dared to threaten a minister of the court and an imperial censor in the hall of the Ministry of Justice with his status as a 5th-level official. Sensing the murderous intent in Fan Xian's light words, Han Jiwei felt an inexplicable chill in his heart. The corner of his eye twitched, and he said coldly, "Fan Xian, you must know that you are an official of the court, not a powerful swordsman. Today, you have caused a ruckus in the Ministry of Justice. I want to see how you will deal with this." Fan Xian said quietly, "The Ministry of Justice wants to force a confession out of you. The imperial censor is angry that Minister Gua has been removed from his position and wants revenge. I don't know what kind of official you are. Tomorrow, I will write a great poem about what happened today and spread it throughout the world. This will teach the people of the Kingdom of Qing today and what the officials are like. It will also teach His Majesty to see who these officials listen to in today's court. Say what you will. Guozheng knew that with Fan Xian's current reputation, it was not impossible for him to pull this off. He said quietly, Sir Fan, if you know the details of the scandal, why did you not report it to your superiors and have the court investigate it? Instead, you acted through the Overwatch Council. In any case, you have committed the crime of looking down on the court. I want to see how Minister Fan explains this to the court tomorrow. His words were overbearing, and a murderous look flashed across Fan Xian's handsome face. He stood up and stared coldly at the two high-ranking officials on the stage. The officials around him grew nervous, and they pointed their sharp blades at Fan Xian's vital points. Just as danger was about to erupt, Yen Ruohai's cold voice came from outside the Ministry of Justice. The Overwatch Council is acting on orders. Since when do we need to explain everything to the Imperial Censor? Fan Xian smiled and shook his head. It was a pity that the people from the council had arrived a little early. Chapter 175. After a series of hurried but orderly footsteps, Yen Ruohai, the head of the 4th Bureau of the Overwatch Council, walked in from outside the Ministry of Justice. Behind him was a large group of secret agents of the Overwatch Council. Seeing the Overwatch Council put on such a show, Guozheng did not say anything. He only frowned and said, I didn't think Master Yen would come to hear the case. Yen Ruohai paid no attention to the Imperial Censor. He looked at the beautiful young man on the chair and smiled. I am Yen Ruohai. Greetings, Master Fan. Fan Xian also stood up and smiled. If Master Yen still doesn't come, I'll have no choice but to tear down the Ministry of Justice and flee the world. Naturally, this was just a joke. Han Jiwei glanced at Yen Ruohai and furrowed his brows. He wondered why the Overwatch Council had come to mess things up. He said, Sir Fan Jr. made a ruckus in court and beat up an official. His crime is unpardonable. No matter who comes, I'm afraid he won't be able to leave the Ministry of Justice today. Besides, the headquarters has already sent a notice to arrest Yang Wanli and the other criminals. Once the witnesses arrive, the case will naturally be cleared up. No need, Yen Ruohai said. The officials of the 13 Yamens went to the Tongfu Tavern to arrest someone, but they have already been arrested by Sir Mu Tai of the 1st Bureau of the Overwatch Council. They are now drinking tea in the Overwatch Council. If you have time, please go and bring your subordinates back. The Ministry of Justice's reputation had been completely lost today. Han Jiwei pointed at Yen Ruohai's nose and scolded. Since when did the Overwatch Council have the right to interfere with the affairs of the Ministry of Justice? What right do you have to stop the Ministry of Justice from arresting someone? The spring examination fraud case is handled by this court. In His Majesty's decree, the Ministry of Justice and the Supreme Court are only assistants. Yen Ruohai looked around and did not see the vice official of the Supreme Court. He smiled and said, Since you are an assistant, you should do your part well. Yang Wanli and the other 3 have always been under our watch and have not yet been convicted. How can they be handed over to the Ministry of Justice? The Yamen laborers under the minister are too much of a scoundrel. Master Mu invited them back to the Overwatch Council. Is that wrong? Guozheng said coldly, Yang Wanli's case is fine. But according to the court's rules, Sir Fan Jr. was sent first by the Ministry of Justice. Of course, of words of the Overwatch Council would not be enough to take him away. Until now, the 3 departments still did not know the true relationship between Fan Xian and the Overwatch Council. They only thought that because Fan Xian exposed the cheating case and came into contact with the Overwatch Council, in addition to his master-disciple relationship with Fei Jie, the Overwatch Council would want to protect him. Thus, they first used the rules to suppress Yen Ruohai. Guozheng saw that he was not listening to the words of the Imperial Censorate, and he was furious. He thought, Your rank is so much lower than mine, how dare you be so rude? This Imperial Censorate rarely interacted with the Overwatch Council, so he had no idea how arrogant the council could be. Yen Ruohai frowned again. He looked at Han Jiwei and bowed. Sir, I have been ordered to bring back Sir Fan Jr. Please make an exception. Han Jiwei saw that the Overwatch Council had arrived. He knew that this was going to be troublesome. His master probably did not expect Chen Pingping to interfere. But he had no other choice. He gritted his teeth and said, "The case has not been closed. How can I bring someone? Sir Yan, this is against the rules." He copied Guozhang's tone and used the court's rules to pressure others. Yan Ruohai frowned and waved his hand. Countless grunts sounded at the same time. In the hall of the Ministry of Justice, the wind of fists and the shadows of feet collided. The people of the 13 yamens had no time to fight back. The people surrounding Fan Xian had already been disarmed and beaten to the ground. It was unknown whether they were dead or alive. The 4th Bureau of the Overwatch Council had always been the most powerful department in the Overwatch Council after the 5th Bureau. How could these bailiffs of the Ministry of Justice resist? Fan Xian found that it was finally quieter. He smiled and waved his sleeves. He walked to Yin Ruohai's side. "Sorry for the trouble. I thought it would only be Wang Qinian." Han Jiwei slammed the table and stood up. "To ignore the laws of the court like this, does the Overwatch Council want to rebel? Tomorrow, I will write to His Majesty and sentence you to death." Yin Ruohai frowned and turned. According to the rules of the court, the officials of the 8 bureaus of the Overwatch Council only take orders from the Emperor. In an emergency, they can temporarily avoid the law. Without a direct order from His Majesty, the 6 ministries, 3 bureaus, and 2 houses cannot interrogate without permission. Have you forgotten this rule? Guozhang laughed sinisterly. "Sir Yan, of course the 3 bureaus would not dare to interrogate a big shot like this. But what does Sir Fan Jr. have to do with the Overwatch Council?" Hu and Jingdo did not know who the 8 bureaus were. Who did not know? When did Sir Fan Jr. become one of the 8 bureaus? You should know that it takes 5 years for the Overwatch Council to be reinstated. Sir Fan Jr. is 17 this year. Could he have been in charge of the 1st Bureau of the Overwatch Council when he was 12? No one would believe it. So Imperial Censor Gua and Minister Han were not worried that Fan Xian would dare step out of the door of the Ministry of Justice. If he did, then he would be in contempt of the law of the Qing Kingdom, a crime that could not be pardoned. Furthermore, Fan Xian had offended so many officials in the capital. Under the turbulent court discussions, even the Prime Minister and Minister Fan would not be able to protect him. His Majesty would have no choice but to punish him. Yen Ruohai looked at Fan Xian and smiled warmly. Fan Xian smiled. His fingers reached to his waist and untied the Rui ornament given to him by the Empress. He tossed it to an Overwatch Council official and then slowly pulled out a wooden tablet. The wooden tablet was slightly yellow, with the words Commissioner written on it. He extended his hand straight towards Imperial Censor Gua and Minister Han. Both of them craned their necks forward to see what was written on the token. They were so shocked that they slumped back into their chairs. The wooden token was like a slap to the faces of these 2 high-ranking officials from afar. Fan Xian smiled and shook his head. "Goodbye, my lords." After saying this, he and Yen Ruohai walked slowly out of the Great Hall of the Ministry of Justice under the protection of the Overwatch Council officials. Behind the table, Imperial Censor Gua's face was ashen. Minister Han leaned back in his chair, deep in thought. No one had expected Fan Xian to be a commissioner of the Overwatch Council. What was a commissioner? It was a transcendent existence above the 8 bureaus of the Overwatch Council. It was one of the most secretive positions in the council. Many officials in the court had speculated, but no one could have guessed that the commissioner, who was rumored to be incomparably sinister, was actually the same person as Fan Xian, who had a belly full of poetry and a face full of sunshine. What do we do? Han Jiwei opened his eyes, and a cold light flashed in them. Neither the 6 bureaus nor the 3 bureaus have the right to interrogate the commissioner of the Overwatch Council, unless His Majesty orders it. But you and I both know that His Majesty would never make such an order. Guozhang frowned. Looking at the large group of people disappearing from the stone steps in front of the Ministry of Justice, he said coldly, "What a turtle made of iron. I can't even find a place to start. But I'm still curious. Why didn't Fan Xian reveal his identity at the beginning? Why did he have to come to the Ministry of Justice? Was he really not afraid that we would use the aces of the court to capture him before Yen Ruohai arrived?" Minister Han also did not understand, but there was great worry in the depths of his heart. Since he could not bite Fan Xian to death today, then what awaited him was certainly a powerful counterattack that was about to arrive. He sighed and thought of Fan Xian's final words of goodbye. He slowly savored a wave of bitterness and fear. He didn't know whether or not the power behind him could protect him. Walking out of the Ministry of Justice, Fan Xian calmly said, "The director forced me to reveal my identity. There was no need to play such a boring game." Yin Ruohai smiled slightly. The director believed that since he purposely wanted the people of the capital to know of your identity, then he needed to reveal it at the right place, at the right time, and in a relatively dramatic way. Today, in the Great Hall of the Ministry of Justice of the Kingdom of Qing, the scholars of the capital have gathered outside to voice their grievances for you. It is a great opportunity. Fan Xian shook his head and said nothing. In reality, today was a bit risky. If the powerful powers hidden behind the 6 ministries wanted to end this battle, they could have used even more ruthless methods. If it weren't for the obvious results of his training in the Tsang Mountains, he wouldn't have had the confidence to talk and laugh freely in the gloomy hall. The Overwatch Council is a secret service organization, so its reputation has never been good. Yen Ruohai quietly explained. So the director made the matter of you exposing the fraud case widely known, and took the lead in establishing your reputation. That way, once your identity as the commissioner of the Overwatch Council is exposed, the scholars and commoners will not feel fear and disgust when they think of you. So, it was just an image-building project. Fan Xian took a deep breath. The depression in his chest had not yet dissipated. There would be time to think about it in detail in the future. Yen Ruohai did not understand what this young commissioner meant. He took the small jade rui ornament that Fan Xian had taken off earlier from the hands of a subordinate and handed it to him. Fan Xian placed the rui in his palm and gently stroked it. Suddenly he asked. Wana entered the palace to explain to the crown prince. Furthermore, I believe that this spring examination did not damage the crown prince's reputation. Given the crown prince's personality, he should not be so unyielding. Before, Minister Han suddenly became ruthless. Who in the Eastern Palace was he relying on? Yen Ruohai smiled. If it wasn't the crown prince, then it was the empress. The empress? Fan Xian raised his eyebrows. He thought that he had offended more and more people, but he didn't know if the empress was dealing with him because of the reason he was afraid of. He clenched the jade rui ornament in his hand. Thinking that this ornament had been given to him by the empress, he unconsciously wanted to throw it away. Yen Ruohai smiled and reminded him. You can do whatever you want with a gift from the palace. That is a great crime. Fan Xian smiled. Thank you for the reminder. But now that my identity as the commissioner is known to the world, which Yamen would dare to interrogate me? The Yamen wouldn't dare, but the palace would. Yen Ruohai gently patted his shoulder. He found that this young man was even younger than his own son. He shook his head and sighed. Fan Xian nodded in acknowledgement. He then said sincerely, Please do not worry, Sir Yen, on this trip to Northern Qi. I will bring you back safely. Thank you, said Yen Ruohai. Walking out of the Ministry of Justice, the scholars and commoners who had been surrounding the street saw Sir Fan, who had bravely uncovered a case of fraud, walk out safely and burst into cheers. Fan Xian smiled and thanked them. Only now did he understand why he had behaved so arrogantly in front of the Ministry of Justice today. It was because he had finally done something that he believed to be absolutely correct. It was like a line he had read in novels in his previous life. What was the right path? The right path was to do what was right, what one believed to be right. This feeling was very good, very powerful. Chapter 176. News of what happened at the Ministry of Justice quickly spread throughout the capital. The expected counterattack of the Overwatch Council, the Prime Minister, and Minister Fan against the Ministry of Justice, and the Imperial Censorate, did not begin immediately. This was beyond the expectations of all the officials. During the palace examination, the Emperor of Qing finally made his stance clear. The people Fan Xian had taken a liking to were all chosen into the second rank. As for the Zhuang Yuan, Bang Yan and Tan Hua, They were, not surprisingly, given to some long-established scholars. Furthermore, Fan Xian knew that the names of these three had appeared on those slips of paper. When he had pasted their names, he had tampered with them. His Majesty's stance on the exam hall fraud case was even more obvious in the specific circumstances of the court examination. During the banquet, the officials were surprised to see Fan Xian, a fifth-level scholar of the Imperial College, sitting uneasily in the front row, to the right of the Crown Prince and the Second Prince. He smiled shyly, as if he had not drunk today, so he was not as wild as he had been the night he had spat out 300 poems. He was not used to the feeling of being watched by so many people. After Fan Xian had caused trouble at the Ministry of Justice, the officials in the capital had long known his true identity. They also knew that the Overwatch Council had used Fan Xian as a pretext to make a fuss. They had used Fan Xian's privilege as the commissioner of the Overwatch Council to strip the faces of the Minister of Justice, Han Jiwei, and the Imperial Censorate, Guozheng. It was also rumored that there had been a disturbance in the palace that night. The commissioner of the Overwatch Council was a very sinister position. The officials still found it difficult to connect Fan Xian, who controlled countless secret agents and secretly controlled the lives of officials. But no matter what, when the officials looked at Fan Xian now, they no longer saw him as a civil official, a son of a powerful family with a powerful background. For the first time, they truly felt Fan Xian's power. After the palace examination, the cheating case in the spring examinations was still under the jurisdiction of the Overwatch Council. Slowly but surely, it was being investigated. Commissioner Fan, on the other hand, had quieted down. Those who knew the inside story guessed that Fan Xian was preparing for his diplomatic mission in a few days. On the 3rd of the 3rd month, the court examination ended, the banquet ended, and the flower arrangement ended. Yang Wanli, Hou Jichang, Cheng Jialin and Shi Chanli, these four scholars who had suddenly been blessed by the heavens, finally found an opportunity to sit uneasily in a carriage and arrive at the gate of Fan Manor on the southern street of the city. Yang Wanli raised his head to look at the lavish facade of Fan Manor. He glanced nervously at the ferocious stone lion crouching by the door and mumbled, "I'm a little nervous." Hou Jichang was the calmest of the four, but this was the first time he had come to such a luxurious manor, so he was a bit nervous. He forced a smile and said, "I've seen Sir Fan Jr. before. Not only is he young and promising, his way of talking is also very interesting. He's not like the other officials in the court, who are hateful. What are you nervous about?" Cheng Jialin stood to the side and didn't know what to say. A few days ago, the Ministry of Justice and the Overwatch Council had caused a ruckus. Logically speaking, the four of them had already been put under Fan Xian's tutelage. The palace examination had passed. No matter what, they should come to the manor to pay their respects. Going back to that day at Tongfu Tavern, the four scholars had suddenly discovered that the most terrifying Overwatch Council in the kingdom of Qing had fought with the bailiffs of the 13 yamens for their sake. They had almost been scared to death. Shi Chanli's temperament was the most gentle and carefree. This time, he hadn't passed, so he was much more relaxed than his three friends. He pointed at them and laughed. "I can see that you are all quite nervous, but it's probably not because you're visiting your teachers. It's because you've discovered that Sir Fan Jr. has suddenly become the commissioner of the Overwatch Council. Brother Zhu, am I right?" Yang Wanli looked at the stone lion again and smiled bitterly. No one would have guessed that in less than 2 days, the immortal poet Fan Xian would suddenly become one of the most powerful officials in the Overwatch Council. It's not like you don't know how frightening the Overwatch Council is. The officials in the court have always been wary of it. Sir Fan Jr. joining the Overwatch Council has not been a good thing. That's just the prejudice of ignorant people. Shi Chanli smiled and said, "That day in Tongfu Inn, you also said that the Overwatch Council is very beneficial in supervising the governance of officials." He turned to the somewhat disapproving Hou Jichang. "After Minister Guo went to prison, you also raised your cup for the Overwatch Council. What's wrong? Now that you've discovered that your teacher is a high-ranking official of the Overwatch Council, you're acting like ordinary people and wanting to keep a respectful distance?" Yang Wanli sighed. The whole world knows that Sir Fan Jr. was the main contributor to the scandal of the spring examination. It was only later that we realized that he had been working for the Overwatch Council all along. Sir Fan Jr.'s actions have not only shaped the futures of the three of us. More importantly, it has created a slightly fairer path for the scholars of the world. Everyone is grateful, even after knowing that he is the commissioner of the Overwatch Council. No scholar dares to show him the slightest disrespect. As for you and me, there's no need to say more. Even if Sir Fan Jr. stays in the Overwatch Council in the future, we still have to follow him. Brother Sure, you don't need to say more. I've already made up my mind. Ho Jichang smiled. That's right. It's just a pity that, according to the rules of the court, any leader of the special agents of the Overwatch Council can no longer enter the cabinet. It's a pity for Sir Fan Jr.'s talent. At this moment, Chung Jialin had a chance to interject. Sir Fan Jr. still has that identity. His official career has never been able to flourish. I hear that next year, he will be in charge of the Royal Merchant's Palace Treasury. So it's not a pity that he can enter the Overwatch Council. Everyone understood that he was talking about Fan Xian's identity as the princess's son-in-law. When they thought about how this extremely young teacher of theirs had so many identities, they all felt it was strange. The four of them discussed in low voices at the gate of Fan Manor for a long time. Finally, they got rid of some of their nervousness and walked toward Fan Manor, handing over the name cards they had prepared. The gatekeeper of Fan Manor had long since noticed these four people who looked like scholars. He took the name cards with a face full of suspicion and found that they were the four people who had been rumored in the capital for a long time. The servants of Fan Manor all knew that their young master had accepted 4 new students. So it was these 4 people in front of them. They respectfully invited them into the gatekeeper's room and served them tea. The 4 of them knew that this was the custom of a noble family. Whenever a guest came, they had to first drink tea in the gatekeeper's room. Unexpectedly, after a short while, the gatekeeper reported back with a face full of embarrassment. The young master has gone out today. He is not in the manor. Would you like to leave a message? Or perhaps come back another day? The 4 of them couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. But deep down, they couldn't help but relax. At that moment, an official's sedan chair stopped by the side door. The gatekeeper hurried forward to greet it. A middle-aged official with a solemn expression stepped out of the sedan chair. His eyes were soft and full of spirit. As he walked past the gatekeeper's room, he stopped and looked at the 4 scholars. The gatekeeper saw that his master had stopped and was about to introduce him. But his master waved his hand and turned to the 4 scholars. Which one of you is Yang Wanli? Who is Shi Changli? Who is Ho Jichang? Who is Chung Jialin? Ho Jichang was shocked. He thought that this man knew who the 4 of them were without asking. And he didn't just ask for their names. He didn't leave out any of them. It seemed that he didn't want to give them the impression of favoritism. For such a clear-minded person to know without thinking, he must be Sir Fan Jr.'s father. He quickly bowed. I am Ho Jichang. Greetings, Minister. The 3 scholars beside him came to their senses. Knowing that the man in front of them was Sir Fan Jr.'s father, they hurriedly bowed as well. Count Sinan smiled and looked at Ho Jichang. It seems that Fan Xian has a good eye, he said with some approval. He's not home. If you don't mind him being long-winded, why don't you accompany me into the manor for a chat? This was their teacher's father. How should they address him? Although the 4 scholars were the rising power of the kingdom of Qing's officialdom, they didn't dare say anything in front of this wily old minister. They obediently followed him into the manor. The ugliest building on Tianhe Road was still silent in the spring light. The famous falling flowers and running water on either side of the road had no petals. Because it was still early in the spring, the flowers had not yet fully bloomed. Naturally, they didn't want to throw their clothes into the water. The common people of the capital still followed the old rules, staying far away from the Overwatch Council. The stone tablet in front of the gate quietly watched them, as if to say, "The council is here to protect you. Why are you so afraid?" Don't ask why the common people were afraid of the Overwatch Council. Just like Yang Wanli and the other scholars, people's fear of secret agencies was always without reason. It was because there seemed to be no light in the yamen, only secrets and darkness. In the square-shaped room of the Overwatch Council, the 7 leaders were sitting at the long table, holding their breaths and calming their spirits. They knew that today's meeting was special, so their gazes toward the crippled director at the end of the long table were filled with doubt. After the head of the first bureau, Zhu Gu, committed suicide in this room, the first bureau had been without a leader. Mutai was only temporarily in charge of his duties in the capital. So today there were only 7 people in the 8 bureaus. The door slid open quietly, but the 7 most powerful figures in the kingdom of Qing sensed it. They unconsciously turned their heads to look at the door. Even Chen Pingping, at the end of the table, slowly raised his head, his eyes calm and spirited. An old man with slightly brown eyes and a head full of messy hair walked in. Everyone was slightly surprised, but they saw Fei Jie turn around and say quietly, "An ugly daughter-in-law has to see her parents-in-law. Come in. What are you waiting for?" The young man behind him came out, a little embarrassed. The young man's face was delicate and amiable, and his face was full of a shy smile. He cupped his hands and bowed to the leaders of the Overwatch Council around the table. He said quietly, a little embarrassed, "Good morning, everyone. I am Fan Xian." Chapter 177. The meeting room of the Overwatch Council fell into an awkward silence. No one had expected Commissioner Fan's first appearance in the Overwatch Council to be in such a situation. It was completely at odds with the usual somber atmosphere of the Overwatch Council. After a while, someone finally couldn't help but laugh. Fan Xian smiled, cupped his hands and walked inside. Of the 7 powerful figures present, he only recognized Yan Ruahai. The others were all unfamiliar. Fortunately, Fei Jie had been by his side all day. Otherwise he would have been afraid to face the most sinister and terrifying spies in the kingdom of Qing alone. At the end of the long table, there was an old man sitting in a wheelchair. His eyes were cold, but they were very gentle as he looked at Fan Xian. For no reason, Fan Xian sighed in his heart and slowly walked forward. He had recognized him long ago. After all, he had seen him 16 years ago when he first came to this world. In those 16 years, the old cripple's face did not seem to have changed much. Chen Pingping looked at the young man who was getting closer and closer to him, and a strange but satisfied expression appeared on his face. Fan Xian had already reached his side. Chen Pingping opened his arms and said softly, "Child, come here." Fan Xian slowly lowered his body and put his head gently on the old man's shoulder. He put his body into the other man's not very wide chest and hugged him lightly. Chen Pingping was very thin, and the contact between their bodies was gentle, but Fan Xian felt very warm. The old man and the young man hugged each other, as if the spies of the kingdom of Qing did not exist. Let them be presumptuous for a while. After a long time, the two slowly separated. Fan Xian bowed respectfully. "I finally meet you." Chen Pingping suddenly let out 2 extremely sharp laughs. His laughter seemed to be extremely happy. Other than Fei Jie, the other 7 spies, who did not know the inside story, maintained a polite silence. But deep down they were shocked. No one knew what kind of relationship this commissioner had with the director, who had always lived in seclusion. Today was Fan Xian's first official day in the Overwatch Council as a commissioner, so the members of the 8 bureaus were waiting here. After a simple self-introduction, Fan Xian quietly sat in the chair to Chen Pingping's left. Fei Jie sat to Chen Pingping's right. "He is Fan Xian." Chen Pingping looked at his subordinates and quietly said, "In the future, I will be the commissioner of the Overwatch Council. Everyone please support me." When Dean Chen introduced the new members, he had never been as serious as he was today, and he had never said so many words. The 7 leaders all knew the weight of these words. They stood and bowed formally to Fan Xian without saying anything more. From the time Fei Jie began teaching Fan Xian at the age of 5, Fan Xian knew that something must have happened between him and the secret service organization that the world feared and the common people avoided. Especially after learning of his mother's relationship with the council, he knew that one day, he would also have a very strange relationship with the council. When he was young, He had learned a lot about the Overwatch Council's organizational setup and workflow from Fei Jia. After entering the capital, he had done a lot of things and cooperated with the Overwatch Council. He had also independently formed the Chinian unit outside the council. Now that he had formally heard this explanation, his understanding of the Overwatch Council had naturally deepened. The Overwatch Council was a secret service organization directly under the Emperor. Its power was outside of the 6 ministries, and it was not limited by Qing law. It only acted according to imperial edict. It was divided into 8 bureaus. The first bureau was responsible for monitoring the officials in the capital, and many spies were placed in important departments. It was the most important department of the Overwatch Council. Its previous leader was Zhu Gu, who had secretly sided with the eldest princess and had died a few months ago. The second bureau was responsible for gathering and analyzing information from various departments, as well as making plans for the emperor and the military. The third bureau was the department that Fan Xian felt closest to. Before his teacher, Fei Jia, retired, he had always been the head of the third bureau. The third bureau was responsible for developing drugs and all kinds of unorthodox weapons. The drugs, poisons, and aphrodisiacs that Fan Xian had on him were basically the results of the third bureau's research. The fourth bureau was Yan Ruohai's department. It was responsible for monitoring the officials of the various provinces outside of the capital, as well as collecting relevant intelligence. Its scope of power extended far beyond the borders of the country, including parts of northern Qi and Dongyi. In terms of authority, it was the most powerful department in the Overwatch Council, aside from the first bureau. The fifth bureau of the Overwatch Council had always been stationed outside the capital. It was established by His Majesty himself and was responsible for protecting Chen Pingping's safety. When necessary, it could also carry out 1,000-mile raids by cavalry. Years ago, when they penetrated deep into northern Wei and captured the spy leader Xiao In, that was the most glorious achievement of the Fifth Bureau. It could be said that this department was the most powerful in the Overwatch Council. The Sixth Bureau was the least famous, but also the most terrifying department. Even though Fan Xian had been in the capital for so long, he had not had much contact with it. This was because the Sixth Bureau was responsible for dealing with assassinations. Of course, on the other hand, the Sixth Bureau was also responsible for protecting the people chosen by the Emperor. The Seventh Bureau was responsible for interrogating and imprisoning enemies. It was a more professional existence than the 13 yamens of the Ministry of Justice. The inconspicuous head of the prison that Fan Xian had seen in the Overwatch Council's prison was the former head of the 7th Bureau. The 8th Bureau. Fan Xian wanted to laugh when he saw the middle-aged official. This was probably the department that he had dealt with the most in the Overwatch Council. The Dambo bookstore did not skimp on paying tribute to the 8th Bureau. Although he had connections, 7th Yi shopkeeper still carefully paid tribute to the 8th Bureau every month. This department, in Fan Xian's opinion, was similar to the yamen of his previous life, except that it had more power and was more independent. After the brief introductions, the 7 leaders of the Overwatch Council did not need Fan Xian to introduce himself. Fan Xian's background was too clear, too glorious. Everyone in the Qing kingdom knew about it. Furthermore, these 7 were as cunning as foxes, as vicious as wolves, and as fierce as tigers. Of these 7 leaders, Fan Xian only recognized Yan Ruohai. He was more interested in the leaders of the 6th and 3rd Bureau. During the introductions, the leader of the 6th Bureau, who was responsible for assassinations, added the word representative. Fan Xian was a bit curious. Where was the most powerful assassin in the Qing kingdom? As for why he was curious about the leader of the 3rd Bureau, it was because Fei Jia had been talking about him out of boredom. This leader, whose surname was Lung, was actually Fei Jia's head disciple. Fan Xian should have called him elder brother instead. After the meeting ended, Lung of the 3rd Bureau and Yan Ruohai of the 4th Bureau stayed behind. Fan Xian and Lung huddled together and whispered for a while. When it came to poisons and hidden weapons, they couldn't help but be exuberant. Yan Ruohai watched from the side and felt his hair stand on end. Only then did he remember that this commissioner was Fei Jia's last disciple, and also a little monster who grew up with poisons. In the future, it would be best if he didn't get too close to him. Seeing the two of them talking happily, Fei Jie frowned. Fei Jie frowned. What kind of person is Xiao En? He has already calculated all of this. I reckon that after the diplomatic mission enters Northern Qi, he will request to stay at Wudu for a month. Under the protection of Northern Qing, he will confirm that there is no remaining poison in his body, and only then will he go to the capital to exchange hostages. Even I can't concoct a poison that can last for a month and take effect at a fixed time. What's the point of you whispering about it for so long? Fan Xian and this big brother, whom he had met for the first time, looked at each other and sighed dejectedly. They cupped their hands and bid farewell, knowing that Fei Jie was right. Chen Pingping gently clapped his hands, gathering the attention of those who remained in the room. On this trip to Northern Qi, he said quietly, there are 4 missions. Fan Xian sat down and listened intently. First, ensure that Yin Bingyun returns safely and takes over his post in the first bureau. Second, after the exchange of hostages is complete and the agreement between the 2 countries is made, immediately kill Xiao En. Chen Pingping seemed to be speaking of a very ordinary matter. Third, carry out the Red Sleeve Plan. The details of this plan will be given to you in a moment. Fourth, on the basis of completing the first 3 missions, consolidate the spy network in Northern Qi. Ensure that intelligence work will not be delayed because of Yin Bingyun's departure. Each of the 4 missions was more difficult than the last. Fan Xian's face was calm, but in his heart he felt a faint excitement and unease. Chen Pingping expressionlessly turned to Yin Ruohai and said, prepare the relevant information. Then before Fan Xian leaves, give him an explanation. Yin Ruohai nodded and left the room. At this moment, only Fan Xian, Chen Pingping, and Fei Jie were left in the room. After a long period of silence, Chen Pingping's hands gently smoothed out the creases in the blanket on his knees. A smile appeared on his face as he looked at Fan Xian. I believe that when you saw the name outside the courtyard, you should have learned many things. Uncle Wu Zhu said a bit. Fan Xian smiled as he looked at the crippled old man in front of him. A very complicated feeling welled up in his heart. Although a large part of his life had been arranged by this old man, for some reason, Fan Xian could not feel the kind of conflict that most people would have. Instead, he felt a strange kind of trust, as if this most terrifying official in the kingdom of Qing was worthy of his trust. This was intuition, and Fan Xian had always trusted and respected his intuition. Lao Wu. Chen Pingping closed his eyes and frowned, as if lost in some kind of memory. Suddenly he said, has his memory gotten better? Fan Xian said quietly. Perhaps he remembers what he should remember, and forgets what he doesn't want to remember. Fei Jie coughed twice and glared at the student. He thought that there was really no need to say such mysterious words in front of the principal. It was very annoying. Chapter 178. Chen Pingping gave a shrill laugh and rubbed his rough fingers together. Is Sir Wu in the capital right now? Fei Jie had asked this question on Fan Xian's wedding night. Fan Xian shook his head and answered just like last time. I heard he went to the south to find Yi Luyan. I don't know when he'll be back. For some reason, Fan Xian seemed to faintly hear a regretful sigh coming from a dark corner of the room. He frowned, and the fingers in his sleeves tightened around his crossbow. What the 3 of them were talking about was too frightening. No matter who heard it, for Fan Xian and Chen Pingping, it would be difficult to bear the consequences. Come out. Chen Pingping seemed to see the reaction in his sleeves. I think you must be very curious about who the true head of the 6th Bureau is. With these words, a person, or more accurately, a black shadow, floated out from the dark corner of the room. It was so ethereal that it did not seem to be immortal. This black shadow floated behind Chen Pingping and gradually revealed itself. It was a man covered from head to toe in black, a strong man. Fan Xian sensed the aura that the other party was deliberately emitting. His pupils shrank, and his entire body tensed up, then slowly relaxed. He had seen this person before. 16 years ago, this shadow-like assassin had stood on Chen Pingping's carriage, swept past like a hawk, and killed a mysterious sorcerer in an instant. He is the head of the 6th Bureau of the Overwatch Council. He never sees outsiders. Fei Jie smiled. Of course, you are not an outsider. The head of the Qing Kingdom's assassins did not say anything. He stood silently behind Chen Pingping, as if he had no interest in Fan Xian. Chen Pingping's voice was a bit hoarse. He continued Fei Jie's words. Aside from Sir Wu, he is the most terrifying assassin in the world. Of course, he is also the best protector. That is why I am still alive today. The black shadow bowed slightly, expressing his thanks to the old man in the wheelchair for his praise. Chen Pingping looked into Fan Xian's eyes and smiled slightly. The shadow is Sir Five's admirer and follower. In fact, many of his techniques were learned many years ago when he was still young. He saw Sir Five's methods and gradually imitated them. Thus, when he heard you say Sir Five was not in the capital, he was a bit disappointed. When Fan Xian looked at the shadow assassin again, his eyes were different. Just by imitating Wu Zhu, he had such power. This #1 assassin of the Kingdom of Qing was truly a genius. Of course, this meant that the blind Wu Zhu was even more terrifying. Fei Jie pushed Director Chen's wheelchair into the large courtyard at the back of the Overwatch Council. The shadow disappeared again into the light of day. No one knew where he had gone. Fan Xian followed closely behind the wheelchair, feeling a little strange. The most powerful assassin in the Kingdom of Qing was quite similar to Wu Zhu's style. He hadn't seen Wu Zhu for many days. Although he wasn't worried, he was about to leave, and he wanted to see the person closest to him. This was the first time Fan Xian had entered the heavily guarded back courtyard of the Overwatch Council. The courtyard was extremely wide, and there were no tall buildings within dozens of feet of the walls, so no one could see what was going on in the courtyard from the outside. Completely different from what people imagined, the back of the Overwatch Council was a beautiful place. Green grass could be seen everywhere, and several towering trees cast their shadows on the ground. Small wildflowers could be seen on the side of the bluestone path. The employees of the Overwatch Council walked silently between the different buildings. When they saw the black wheelchair from afar, they would bow respectfully. And every time they walked a certain distance, Fan Xian would frown. Beneath the beautiful fake mountains, and in the tender undergrowth, there seemed to be hidden spies everywhere. The security was much tighter than that of the palace. Familiarize yourself with this place. In the future, this courtyard is yours. Chen Pingping said this very casually and suddenly. It felt as easy as throwing a steamed bun to Fan Xian. Fan Xian's heart skipped a beat. Although he had long known about this arrangement, he still hadn't expected the old cripple to say it so simply. Chen Pingping frowned at him, shook his head and sighed. Fan Xian didn't know why he sighed. He smiled and said, I have a few questions. Let's hear them. The wheelchair stopped next to a shallow pond. The water was clear, and golden fish could be seen swimming freely in the water. Chen Pingping stared at the water. I have offended many people in the exam hall case. But why did Imperial Censor Gua and Minister Han dare to act against me? Are they not afraid of the wrath of my father and the Prime Minister? Fan Xian looked at Chen Pingping's messy hair and quietly said, In the Eastern Palace, if not the Crown Prince's orders, why would the Empress act against me? Chen Pingping didn't turn around. He waved his hand. Fei Jie smiled and patted his student on the shoulder, expressing his appreciation for his courage. He then left the pond. Fan Xian stepped forward to take over his teacher's position and pushed the wheelchair along the small pond. Chen Pingping was silent for a moment. Are you forcing me to lay my cards on the table? You should at least let me know how much they know about us. Chen Pingping laughed shrilly. What a cautious young man. It seems that you have guessed some things, and are afraid that the Empress is acting against you because of those things. Fan Xian smiled. Yes, if the Empress really does know what I have guessed, then it is only natural that she would act against me. That is the only reason I can think of. The problem is that if that is the case, my current strength is not enough to stand against the Eastern Palace. The enemy is all paper tigers, Chen Pingping suddenly said. Fan Xian hadn't expected to hear this from the other's mouth, and couldn't help but be shocked. Then he heard Chen Pingping say lightly, This is what your mother said in the past. She also said that we should look down on the enemy strategically, and pay attention to the enemy tactically. Fan Xian felt like laughing. This cripple certainly didn't know that the original author of these words was not his mother. Chen Pingping smiled. And your biggest problem right now is that you pay too much attention to the enemy strategically. You are even afraid of the enemy, so your hands and feet are tied. Think back to that day in the Great Hall of the Ministry of Justice. Even if you fought your way out, who would dare to do anything to you? And on the tactical level you think too little. If it weren't for the council cleaning up after you, the things you have done since you entered the capital would have been enough to kill you 100 times over. Fan Xian was speechless. Chen Pingping gently crossed his hands on his thighs. Don't think too highly of the Eastern Palace. In the entire kingdom of Qing, there is no truly powerful force, including the Prime Minister and your father Fan Jian. Fan Xian seemed to understand. Violence is true power, so only the military and the Overwatch Council are truly powerful. Chen Pingping raised a hand and shook it with a long old finger. No, in the entire kingdom of Qing, there is only one truly powerful person. Fan Xian lowered his head and quietly said, "It is the Emperor." Chen Pingping smiled. Correct. His Majesty can ignore everything. As long as he still holds the military power of the world in his hands, he can do whatever the officials and harem want. He won't even bat an eyelid. Fan Xian smiled mockingly and said, "What a leisurely emperor." Chen Pingping rubbed his somewhat dry hands. "The Overwatch Council is His Majesty's," he said slowly. "I am only acting in charge. In the future, you will also be acting in charge. Remember this." Fan Xian looked calmly at the head of the Kingdom of Qing's Secret Service. He didn't know whether or not he should doubt his rumored loyalty to the emperor. The black wheelchair had been circling around the shallow pond for a long time. The golden fish in the water were a little dizzy, and they slowly sank to the bottom of the pond. Ignoring the boring old man and the young man, they began to play with the fine sand with their mouths. The officials of the Overwatch Council watched from afar, as the director and Commissioner Fan talked in secret. They didn't dare disturb them. Chen Pingping suddenly sighed. Time always passes quickly. In the blink of an eye, your mother's son is already so big. Fan Xian was startled. What did he mean by his mother's son? Why didn't he just say he was married? He smiled bitterly. I only regret that I don't know what my mother looked like. Chen Pingping smiled. There is only one portrait of your mother in the world. It was secretly painted by a master painter. In the end, that master painter was almost killed by Sir Wu. Fan Xian smiled. That painting isn't in the palace, is it? Chen Pingping didn't answer directly. He only faintly said, "You don't need to worry too much about the Eastern Palace. As I said before, the Empress's power was pretty much eliminated by His Majesty 12 years ago." Fan Xian knew the story of the night the capital bled. He frowned. Why didn't His Majesty abolish the Empress? After all, she is the Crown Prince's mother, and she has always been favored by the Empress Dowager. Most importantly, Chen Pingping said with a smile that wasn't quite a smile, "Our Majesty, where else could he find another empress with no power behind her? And such a stupid one at that." Fan Xian felt a chill in his heart. That emperor really wasn't a good person. Fortunately, Chen Pingping didn't know what he was thinking about His Majesty. He still spoke gently. "Don't worry about people discovering your identity. The death of that baby 16 years ago was an unchangeable fact in the palace. The stupid empress had Minister Han make a move on you, because she was thinking from the Crown Prince's point of view. At the time, she didn't know you were the commissioner of the Overwatch Council. She was only angry at you for meeting the second prince on the pleasure boat." Chen Pingping frowned a little angrily. "I believe Count Sinan told you not to get too close to these princes. Did you think that the nobles of the capital would not know about your meeting on the pleasure boat?" Fan Xian smiled awkwardly. When he was in the Great Hall of the Ministry of Justice, he really did not think that the Empress had used the Ministry of Justice's fire stick to warn him, because she was afraid of the second prince. At the time, he had thought that she knew about his past. Chapter 179. Chen Pingping gently plucked a small pink flower and carefully pinned it to the end of his hair. Seeing that the flower was trembling, as if it would fall at any moment, he quickly used his fingers to press the old man's hair together, so that the flower would be more stable. Chen Pingping smiled happily and gently patted Fan Xian's hand. After 16 or 17 years of struggle, you've finally come to the capital and grown up. I can finally answer to your mother. Fan Xian had always been curious about the story of the past. He couldn't help but ask, how many of you were there? He was naturally asking about the powerful people who had followed his mother and wanted to change the world. You can count for yourself. Fan Xian counted on his fingers and smiled. 6. Your mother was a very powerful person. Chen Pingping smiled. It seems that you are quite smart. About the first sentence, Teacher Fei Jie already said it to me when I was very young. I don't think he said it, but we all miss your mother. In some ways she was my guide. A little surprised. Fan Xian smiled. But I can guess a little. Be more respectful to Count Sinan, and be nicer to the Fan family. Chen Pingping suddenly became very serious. They have done a lot for you. Fan Xian slightly lowered his eyelids. To be able to protect the life of a little infant under such strange circumstances, to make the people in the palace believe that he was dead, without even asking. His father must have done a lot. He said, who is the real enemy I need to guard against? It can't be that crazy eldest princess. She was still very young at the time. The eldest princess is just a poor woman. To the people of the royal family, the young lady's brilliance is too dazzling. She has lived under your mother's shadow all her life. She prides herself on her intelligence and ability, and has obtained many benefits for the kingdom of Qing. But in the end, she was never as important as your mother in His Majesty's heart. As for the enemy, there is no enemy, there is no enemy. Chen Pingping softly repeated, as if trying to convince himself. First in charge of the Overwatch Council, then in charge of the palace treasury. I think there will always be people who will feel that something is wrong. Fan Xian smiled. What do you want me to do? Chen Pingping quietly said. Don't you want to be a powerful official? Fan Xian looked calmly into Chen Pingping's eyes and suddenly said, I think I know what you want to do. Chen Pingping's expression did not change. He smiled and said, I hope you will always pretend that you don't know what I want to do. Fan Xian frowned. Although I don't have any blood ties with them, I still don't want to see too many people shed blood. It's still early. Chen Pingping said softly. Moreover, when it comes to bloodshed, it's often the stupid people who first pull out their knives and want to cut someone else's neck, but accidentally cut their own neck instead. Fan Xian smiled bitterly. Although he respected and trusted this old man, he had to walk his own path. Since entering the capital, he had maintained a tacit understanding with the director of the Overwatch Council, who had done many things for him. But if something really did happen in the future that caused the two of them to think differently, Fan Xian would choose to respect his own intentions first. Chen Pingping waved his hand and furrowed his brows. In the future, you have to learn to open your eyes a bit more. Don't always focus on one ministry, one department, and a mere official in Jingdo. You have to learn to stand higher. Fan Xian smiled. Do I have to set my eyes on the world? Chen Pingping smiled. Perhaps even higher. Fan Xian did not understand. Go. On this trip to Northern Qi, be careful. Chen Pingping coughed and took the pink flower from his hair. He gently rubbed it between his fingers and said quietly, Xiaoyin is going to die. Of course, you have to ensure your own safety first. Apart from that, do as you see fit with the other 3 missions. If the situation permits, you can try to find out where the temple is. After all, in this world, only Ku He, the imperial advisor of Northern Qi, has ever made contact with the temple. Fan Xian frowned. The temple, it's too sudden. I don't seem to have much confidence, although I do like to take risks. Chen Pingping nodded. Your mother also liked to take risks. But I really don't worry about your life or death. If you still can't crawl back from Northern Qi alive, after Sir Wu has taught you for so many years, then I will express my disappointment in you at your funeral. The old man smiled and sprinkled the flower petals between his fingers on the ground. How could a young man like him deal with the real enemy? After saying goodbye to his mother's old comrade, Fan Xian returned to the building and met with Yan Ruahai. He took some files and prepared to go back to the manor to study them. Northern Qi was in an unusually complicated situation. Even if Chen Pingping wanted to use this matter to give Fan Xian real control of the Overwatch Council, if Fan Xian did not want to, no one could force him to go to that strange country. But Fan Xian really wanted to go. In his previous life, he had been imprisoned in a sickly body, without control. In this life, he had been imprisoned in a strange life, without control. This was a rare opportunity for him to go to Northern Qi, where he could fly freely in the sky and crawl freely in the sea. How could Fan Xian let go of this opportunity to be presumptuous? So he earnestly asked Yin Ruohai about the things he should pay attention to on this trip, and asked about the people he needed to pay attention to in Northern Qi. Yin Ruohai shook his head and looked at the young commissioner. It seemed he didn't know why Fan Xian was so passionate about this matter. Northern Qi has always been unstable. The Empress Dowager is too young, and the Emperor is too young. But after the war last year, it seems that their capital has stabilized a lot. Sir Commissioner, there are 3 things you need to pay attention to. One is Friar He, another is Shang Shanhu, and the last is of course the rarely seen imperial advisor Ku He. Friar He? Fan Xian frowned. There was no Taoism in this world, so why was he called Friar He? Yin Ruohai didn't know what he was thinking, so he didn't explain. Friar He is a master of the rear party. Cheng Jushu, whom Commissioner Fan killed last year, was his disciple. Shang Shanhu is a rare brave general in Northern Qi. He has always fought the barbarians in the snowy north. I heard that after Northern Qi was defeated last year, he was transferred back to the capital by the young emperor. Sir Commissioner, on this trip to Northern Qi, you must pay attention to him, because the council has always been suspicious of his teacher. As for Imperial Advisor Ku He, as one of the 4 great grandmasters, he shouldn't be involved in these worldly matters, but he frowned. Ku He has accepted a disciple, and this year he has officially entered the world to train. Sir Commissioner, your name is known all over the world. You must be careful if they come to cause trouble. Fan Xian was startled. For some reason, he thought of the prostitute sex he had read about in the novels of his previous life. It can't be a woman, can it? He asked with a wry smile. Yin Ruohai said expressionlessly, we don't know if it's a man or a woman. All we know is that in the past 3 months, this great grandmaster's disciple has traveled throughout Northern Qi and challenged countless high-ranking masters. There are even rumors that he is the legendary Tianmai One. He looked at Fan Xian and asked quietly, Sir Commissioner, do you know of the Tianmai One? Fan Xian felt that the term sounded familiar. Suddenly, he had a flash of inspiration. When he was young, Fei Jie had mentioned it once. Later, when he was eavesdropping on the conversation between the eldest princess and Zhuang Mohan in Guangxin Palace, he had also heard it once. After listening to Yin Ruohai's explanation, Fan Xian frowned. A genius that only appears once every 500 years. The bloodline of the heavens. It's not like he's a bunch of leeks that grow in the fields. I don't believe it. Yin Ruohai nodded. According to the council's analysis, it is likely that Northern Qi, because of their successive defeats, needs to create the image of an exceptional young master to increase the people's confidence. Fan Xian smiled. That's more likely. It's just like how the council has been trying to create the image of me as commissioner. What's that person's name? Haidang. Fan Xian felt a headache coming on. I hope it's a sissy, but please don't let it be a real sissy. The 2 of them chatted for a bit. Finally, Yin Ruohai looked at Fan Xian calmly, the wrinkles at the corners of his eyes wrinkling weakly. He said quietly, regarding my son, I'll have to trouble you, Sir Commissioner. I told you at the gate of the Ministry of Justice. Fan Xian replied seriously. I will bring Master Yin safely back to Qing. After leaving the 4th Bureau's room, Wang Qinian, who had been waiting outside, hurried over and took the pile of files from Fan Xian's hands. Fan Xian looked ahead, but he spoke quietly to his confidant. I will definitely bring you to Northern Qi. Thank you for your trust, sir. Wang Qinian replied with a smile. If there were no other arrangements for this trip to Northern Qi, it would truly be a gilded leisurely trip. No country in the world would dare to make a move on a diplomatic mission. Fan Xian shook his head and smiled. I'm bringing you because you're the fastest person in the Overwatch Council. Of course, that's excluding Zhong Jue. Wang Qinian smiled bitterly and didn't say anything. Earlier, he had gone to Zhong Jue's place to catch up. He and Zhong Jue used to be known as the two wings of the Overwatch Council. Later, Wang Qinian became content with administrative matters, so his position gradually became ordinary. Zhong Jue had always been depressed. Now that Wang Qinian had become Commissioner Fan Xian's confidant, Zhong Jue felt that his old friend had finally regained some of his former glory, and he was very happy. The head of the Third Bureau, Brother Lung, had long been waiting by the door of the secret room. Seeing Fan Xian arrive, he didn't say anything. He felt very cold. Pushing open the door and entering the secret room, he was greeted by a cool breeze. The wind wasn't fast, and Fan Xian raised his eyebrows. He immediately knew that this sort of well-ventilated place had nothing to do with making poison. Chief Lung glanced at his junior brother and suddenly grinned, saying, "Nice figure." Fan Xian looked at this senior disciple he had just met and shivered. He thought to himself, "No way?" Hearing his senior disciple's next words, Leader Lung yelled into the room, "Standard." Fan Xian was startled. Not long after, he saw 5 or 6 people push out a large table. On the table were a few boxes, and a piece of clothing made of strange material. The 5 or 6 people looked at Fan Xian, their faces expressionless. Perhaps it was because they had been in a strange department like the Third Bureau for too long, that they all seemed a bit wooden. But after a closer look, they couldn't help but show expressions of admiration. They said to Commissioner Fan, "Nice figure." Chapter 180. When these strange officials of the Third Bureau said that Fan Xian had a good figure, they meant that Fan Xian's figure was perfect and would fit perfectly with the accessories developed by the Third Bureau. There was no need to change the size. Fan Xian put on the clothes and frowned. He remembered that night when he was 5, when Fei Jia had snuck into his bedroom. He seemed to be wearing the same clothes, which were especially resistant to tearing. Lung explained, "It is resistant to fire, but not strong. It can effectively reduce the damage of sharp weapons. But if the opponent is wielding a mountain-splitting axe, you'd better hide." Fan Xian smiled bitterly and spread his hands. He found that the style was fashionable in the capital, but there was a hidden hoodie at the back. "Take out the crossbow." Lung immediately saw the crossbow on Fan Xian's left forearm. Fan Xian sighed and reluctantly put the crossbow that had accompanied him for 4 or 5 years and rarely left his side on the table. Lung looked at the thickness of his arm, opened a box on the table, and took out a small black crossbow. He carefully placed it in his sleeve, adjusted it, and looked at the crossbow that Fan Xian had just taken out. He frowned. "What kind of crappy thing is this? It's a model from 7 years ago, and you're still using it." Fan Xian smiled bitterly. "As long as it's enough, I'm content." Lung carefully explained the structure and firing principle of the crossbow to his junior. "This is a repeating crossbow, but it's too small, so it can only hold 3 bolts. These 3 bolts are coated with A4 poison. You should understand that, junior." Fan Xian understood that the A4 poison of the Third Bureau was the venom of the golden melon plant. It could kill on contact with blood. He touched the trigger with his little finger and frowned. "I need a distance of 3 meters. It can only guarantee a distance of 3 meters. It can't guarantee that it will hit the eyes, throat, or testicles," Lung said calmly. Leader Lung said calmly, "As for your dagger, it is Marshal Uncle Fei's favorite short weapon. It is incomparably sharp. So you don't need to change it. There are some unorthodox weapons here, as well as some supplementary tools. Since I don't know what kind of mission you'll be undertaking, you can choose for yourself." Fan Xian knew that this selection would have a great impact on his movements in northern Qi, so he looked at it carefully for a long time. In the end, he chose a few items, but he did not choose a wall-climbing claw that could shoot 30 meters into the air. An official of the Third Bureau was curious and said, "Commissioner, although I do not know the specifics of the mission, I think it is unavoidable to go to the Northern Qi Royal Palace and see if there are any good things to bring back. The walls of the Northern Qi Royal Palace in Shangjing are no shorter than the Royal Palace in Jingdou." These words were very naive, very simple, very flattering, and made Fan Xian laugh. He looked at the intricately designed iron claws, shook his head, and did not explain anything. In this world, there was no one who could crawl better than him. When it comes to poisons, Uncle Fei said that your talent is far above that of the members of the Third Bureau, so we weren't prepared. Lung carefully checked Fan Xian's equipment and nodded with satisfaction. Fan Xian drooled and said, "But I lack materials." Chief Lung's interest was piqued. "What are you lacking?" "Makuzi, arsenic, strychnine and Nanhai camphor." "Makuzi is too bitter, and it does not match your plan this time," Chief Lung said curiously. "Arsenic and strychnine are both very common." Fan Xian smiled bitterly. "With my current status, it is not convenient for me to ask someone to buy these things for me. It is easy to attract attention, then make some chloroform. Teacher tested it the year before last, and it is very effective," Chief Lung said excitedly. "It is better than strychnine." Fan Xian became even more excited and nodded. "But arsenic is a must. I tried it in Danzhou, and it is very effective. It reacts faster than arrow poison." As soon as the topic of poisons came up, the two of them became professionally excited. The officials of the Third Bureau next to them were all of the same kind, and so they surrounded them and began a heated discussion, debating which poison could make a person die the slowest and most painful death, and which poison could turn a widow living under a memorial arch into the most ferocious animal on Lujing River. In short, the Third Bureau of the Overwatch Council was a perverted department, and there lived a group of perverted people. After coming out of the Third Bureau, Wang Qinian found that Commissioner Fan was not as calm as usual. His delicate face carried a hint of excitement and a faint red, as if he had done something. Fan Xian was beaming. "Playing the scholar every day is too tiring. It is better to discuss practical life skills in a place like this." The perverted ancestor of the perverted Third Bureau, Mr. Fei Jia, was holding a cup of tea at the end of the corridor. He looked at his young student with a faint smile and a trace of satisfaction. "Why don't you stay in the Third Bureau?" Fei Jia said quietly as he walked forward with his student. "Don't go to Northern Qi, don't be a court official, and don't care about the palace treasury. It would be nice to spend the rest of your life in peace." Fan Xian was silent. He knew that his teacher was worried about him. "You were very quiet when you were young, but you knew what you wanted." Fei Jia's eyes were a bit turbid, and the light brown color seemed a bit heavy. "After entering the capital, your heart's guard has become even firmer. But power is something that can easily make you lose yourself. Are you clear about what you want?" Fan Xian was silent for a while, then respectfully said, "I know." Fei Jia suddenly cackled. "If you want to walk that path, you must learn to kill, be willing to kill, and enjoy killing." Fan Xian's face was bitter. "I'm not a pervert." Fei Jia blinked his tired eyes and coughed. "This world is very perverted. If you are not perverted, how can you play around?" In front of Fei Jia, Fan Xian always felt that he was still the child with the porcelain pillow. He smiled sweetly. "There are many ways to play around." "Oh right. Teacher, why did the director sigh when he saw me?" Perhaps he was a little disappointed. "You are not as arrogant as the lady was?" Fan Xian was worried. A good man does not compare himself to a woman. Having said this, he took his teacher by the hand and went to Yishir Tavern. Today he had to get drunk. The whole capital already knew of his relationship with the Overwatch Council, so there was no need to avoid it. But Wang Qinian, who was behind them, was panting as he held a pile of files. He knew that these files were top-secret intelligence, so he did not dare to be negligent. He did not dare to follow them to Yishir Tavern to drink and have fun. He quickly called for his spies to be on guard, and uneasily rode the carriage to Fan Manor. The Crown Prince sat in the Eastern Palace with a gloomy expression. His hand gripped the wine cup tightly, and his fingers trembled slightly. A moment later, he spat out a sentence from between his teeth. "Why do the women in the palace never learn to be content?" Xian Shaoqing of Taichung Temple did not dare to interrupt. He knew that the Crown Prince was in a particularly bad mood today. Everything that had happened in the past few days had made the entire Eastern Palace angry and angry. Even the usually gentle Grand Tutor, had lost his temper a few times. First, it was the spring examination scandal. In fact, the Eastern Palace had suffered the least in this scandal. Of the dozen or so officials who had been arrested, only a few truly belonged to the Eastern Palace. Although the fall of Guoyu, the Minister of Rights, was an unbearable loss to the Crown Prince in the eyes of the officials. After the banquet, the Crown Prince discovered that Guo seemed to listen to someone else. Gradually, he realized that the Guo family was actually on the eldest princess's side. So when Fan Xian brought down Guoyu, the Crown Prince was not angry. On the contrary, he felt somewhat gratified. No one expected that Sir Fan Jr. was the commissioner of the Overwatch Council. Xianqiwu frowned slightly. He had drunk with Fan Xian many times, but he had never imagined that the gentle Fan Xian was actually a high-ranking member of the Secret Service. Crown Prince Li Chengqian shook his head. The gloominess on his face did not fade. Fan Xian is a sensible man. He exposed the scandal mainly because of his duty. It is understandable that he did not communicate with me beforehand. As long as you look at the matter, Fan Xian has given me enough face. I will not blame him too much. Furthermore, Sister Wanner made a special trip to the palace that day and handed over Fan Xian's personally written letter. I believe he did not intentionally target me. Xianqiwu and Fan Xian were good friends. And of course he hoped that the Eastern Palace would have a powerful ally like Fan Xian in the Overwatch Council. He nodded in agreement. Indeed, although Commissioner Fan did not say anything before, he did everything he could to remedy the situation. Unfortunately, he is about to leave for Northern Qi. Otherwise, I would be able to arrange for him to visit the Crown Prince. The Crown Prince snorted and slammed his wine cup down on the table. He said angrily, "Even if he wants to see me now, would Fan Xian dare to confide in me?" The Ministry of Justice incident has caused quite a stir. Although the Prime Minister and Minister Fan have not made any moves, do you think they do not know the relationship between Han Juwei and me? I fear that the Fan family hates me more than enough, not to mention seeking refuge. Xianqiwu was silent. He knew that the Crown Prince's handling of this matter was wise and prudent. Unfortunately, there were two masters of the Eastern Palace. Just as the master and the official were dissatisfied, they suddenly heard the eunuch outside announce in a loud voice, "The Empress has arrived." Xianqiwu looked at the Crown Prince, indicating with his eyes that His Highness must control his emotions. He then rushed to kneel to the side, bowed to the Empress, and left the palace. The Empress, who had a pair of phoenix eyes, quietly looked at her son and did not say a word. The Crown Prince sat to the side with a smile on his face, but he would not say anything first. The Empress bit her lower lip. A trace of disappointment and sadness flashed through her eyes. Suddenly, she raised her hand and slapped him across the face. Chapter 181. The Crown Prince tilted his head and dodged his mother's slap. He turned his hand to grab her cold wrist and looked at his mother quietly. The Empress had not expected the usually timid Crown Prince to have such a sharp gaze. Her body trembled, and she pulled her hand away from her son's. "Do you really think I did something wrong?" she asked slowly. The Crown Prince frowned and said softly, "I dare not." The Empress suddenly raised her voice. "Did you not know that Fan Xian and the second prince met on the pleasure boat?" The Crown Prince suddenly raised his head and looked straight into the Empress's eyes. "Mother, can you let me handle these things myself? Fan Xian is a great poet, and it is normal for him to meet with the second brother." The Empress was anxious and angry, but she did not know how to speak to her timid and fierce son. The Crown Prince looked at her and said quietly, "Mother, I have often thought that you should not be so sensitive. You will only drive away the officials who can help me to my other brothers." The Empress gritted her teeth. "I am the mother of the country. If I punish a minor official, would he dare to hold a grudge?" The Crown Prince mockingly said, "Mother, you should not have allowed Minister Han to act that day. You could not have actually killed Fan Xian, so why offend the Fan family and the Prime Minister? I think that after a few more days, Minister Han will not be able to hold his own in the court. There are not many officials in the court who are willing to be close to the Eastern Palace. And yet you insisted on cutting off a finger. I really do not know what you were thinking. The empress frowned. Han Jiwei is the current minister of the court, and he was investigating the case according to the law. What could the prime minister in Fanjian do? With the Eastern Palace protecting him, I think His Majesty will have to give you some face. Do not forget, Fan Xian is the commissioner of the Overwatch Council, and father has always admired him. The crown prince sighed and shook his head. Han Jiwei has offended too many powerful people this time. You must know that it was father who wanted to clean up the exam grounds. I cannot protect him. The empress laughed coldly. Do not forget that Fan Xian has also offended many officials in the capital. Furthermore, the imperial censorate is involved. Although your aunt is far away in Xinjiang, with her influence in the court, I am sure she will not stand idly by. Don't mention my aunt. The crown prince seemed to loathe the eldest princess. She's been too strange these past 2 years. She's actually colluding with Northern Qi. She's too daring. Where does she put the face of the Qing kingdom? As for that imperial censor Gua of the imperial censorate, he was just a pretty boy she used to play with. Even if he was assassinated by the Overwatch Council, she wouldn't bat an eye. After all, the crown prince was the heir to the throne of a country. Although the eldest princess had always been close to the Eastern Palace, after Fan Xian's words fell like snowflakes across Jingdo, the crown prince was also a bit afraid of the eldest princess. Of course, there were other reasons. The empress said painfully, "We have no other help except the eldest princess. I will rely on imperial father." The crown prince replied calmly. At this moment, the crown prince, who had always seemed rather cowardly, finally displayed the innate political sense and judgment of a member of the royal family. The empress slowly closed her eyes and said, "In short, I don't like Fan Xian. Think of a way to kill him." Crown Prince slammed the table angrily and said, "Die? Have you forgotten that Fan Xian is Chener's husband? You mustn't listen to my aunt all the time. That woman is mad. Do you know that? Do you also want to become mad and be chased out of the royal palace?" The empress was so angry that her entire body trembled. Pointing at the crown prince's nose, she said in a trembling voice, "What do you know? What do you know? What do you know? What do you know?" Perhaps the crown prince's words had touched the empress's old wounds. In her anger she said, "What do you know?" 4 times in a row. The eunuchs and serving girls had long hidden far away. In the Eastern Palace, there were only the mother and son. After a very long silence, the empress stood. However, her body seemed a bit weak and swayed. The crown prince quickly rose to support her, and helplessly asked for forgiveness. The empress looked at her son with incomparable misery. There were already wrinkles at the sides of her beautiful almond-shaped eyes. Faintly she said, "Throughout the dynasties and dynasties, the crown prince has always been the most difficult position to sit in. You have to guard your front and back. There is no one at home. You probably don't have many memories of the turmoil 12 years ago, but I remember clearly that if you don't fight for it, then what belongs to you will be taken away by others." The crown prince did his best to soften his voice and said quietly, "I understand. Mother, go back to the palace to rest." The empress shook her head. You don't understand. These days, I've always had a bad feeling. This feeling is very strong. Just like many years ago, when that woman entered Jingdo." "Which woman?" the crown prince asked curiously. At that moment, the heavy wooden door of the Eastern Palace was suddenly pushed open. "Who is it?" The crown prince furrowed his brows and angrily rebuked. An old eunuch walked in with a bent body and said respectfully, "I, Hongxiang, have come on the Empress Dowager's orders to invite the Empress to Hongguang Palace for a chat." A glimmer of fear flashed across the Empress's face. Shortly after, she piled a smile on her face. With a dignified bearing and the serving girl's support, she followed the bent eunuch Hong toward the true mistress of the royal palace. The crown prince furrowed his brows slightly. Although he disliked the old dog's rudeness, he knew he was the eunuch closest to his grandmother. Even his mother didn't want to offend him. Naturally, he wouldn't do anything more. The candlelight in the palace gradually dimmed. Crown Prince Li Chengqian thought of the absurd farce that day in the Ministry of Justice, and felt even more depressed. He truly didn't understand while his mother listened to the eldest princess's words. Thinking of that young and charming aunt, the crown prince's heart warmed. His face was ashamed and slightly terrified. However, his eyes gradually revealed lust. He flicked his sleeves and walked toward the back of the hall. A moment later, there was a burst of almost inaudible moaning. A palace maid was tossing and turning under his body, begging for pleasure. The crown prince had completely lifted the woman's palace gown to her neck and face, covering her face, only revealing her white and full chest. As he forcefully penetrated, he panted heavily. He thought to himself, why are all the gentle and charming women in the world unwilling to lie obediently in bed and insist on showing off their stupid methods? Spring had come, the flowers were in bloom, and the birds were chirping. Yang Wanli and the other 3 newly promoted officials went to Fan Manor again, wanting to bathe in the spring breeze of Sir Fan Jr. Unexpectedly, Sir Fan Jr. was still not in the manor. What gave Ho Jichang even more of a headache was that he had received news that Sir Fan Jr. was currently on a mission and would be leaving for Northern Qi the next day. The second-ranked Jinshi did not enter the Hanlin Academy. According to the rules of previous years, they would be sent to any local official. Seeing that the Ministry of Appointments was about to send them off, other than Shi Chanli, the other 3 naturally wanted to hear Fan Xian's opinion. After all, in this spring examination, the 3 of them had relied on Fan Xian's strength to get to this step. They naturally thought that Fan Xian would need them to do something locally. Unexpectedly, Fan Xian did not meet with them. He only left them 2 letters. One was for the 3 new officials who were about to leave the capital, and the other was for Shi Chanli, who was preparing to return to his hometown for the examination. The 4 of them sat in Fan Manor's study and took a sip of the good tea the servants had brought. Without caring to avoid arousing suspicion, they opened the 2 letters their teacher had left them. One of the letters was for Ho Jichang, and the other 2 scholars. It was a blank piece of paper with only 2 simple sentences written on it. Be a good person, be a good official. The last sentence was for Ho Jichang. In the letter, Fan Xian wrote, Jichang, do not be too henpecked. This was a cold joke that only Fan Xian understood. The 3 scholars naturally did not understand what it meant. They only focused on the first 2 sentences. Be a good person, be a good official. The more they thought about it, the more they felt that these simple words contained a very real truth. To learn to be an official, one had to first learn to be a good person. But there was another layer of meaning to these words, and they didn't know which one of them understood it. To be a good person was not to be a good person. To be a good official was not necessarily to be a good official. After reading this letter, Yang Wanli was naturally very interested in the letter in Shi Chanli's hands. He didn't know what was written in the letter that Sir Fan Jr. left for Shi Chanli. After all, among the 4 of them, only Shi Chanli seemed to have a dim future. Shi Chanli uneasily opened the letter under the gazes of his 3 friends. After a closer look, he saw that it was a few broken sentences, and he almost laughed out loud. Old Governor Fong is not cooperative. 30% man, 70% heaven. Do not worry that you have no friends under your umbrella. Play well and be idle. The last 3 words were idle, which meant that they were waiting for Fan Xian's return. Fan Xian was sitting in the courtyard he had originally bought, frowning slightly. His fingers stroked the hollow belt, and felt the pill that Fei Jie had given him when he was young. At the time, his teacher had said that if anything happened to the tyrannical Jinshi in his body, he would have to rely on this pill to save his life. But after entering the capital, the tyrannical Jinshi in his body had always been very obedient, and he had somewhat forgotten about this matter. Today, when he was tidying up his equipment, he remembered. But after so many years, he didn't know if Fei Jie's pill had lost its effect. Wang Qinian sat across from him and respectfully replied, I have found the person. He hesitantly raised his head and said, Of course, there is a bit of a resemblance. Sir Commissioner is skilled in the art of disguise. With a bit of embellishment, presumably, a normal person looking from a distance would not be able to see any flaws. But there is still something wrong. What's wrong? Fan Xian was slightly startled. Didn't you say it was quite similar? It's been a month, and the skin color is similar. Wang Qinian quietly replied. To find someone as handsome as you among these dirty men is already a difficult task. Even if the appearance is similar, to impersonate the commissioner's naturally romantic temperament and scholarly elegance is a very difficult task. Fan Xian was startled and immediately understood. He jokingly scolded, "You're a supporting character. Nowadays, your flattery is becoming more and more unrestrained and wonderful." Chapter 182. That night, he returned to the manor and learned that Yang Wanli and the others had come. Fan Xian did not think much of it. In any case, he had already said what he wanted to say in the inn. As long as they were good officials, loved the people, and rose higher and higher official positions, it would be fine. Although Fan Xian was not a great hero who worked for the country and the people, he would be happy if a few of his students came up. As for the dirty things he might arrange for them to do in the future, he would think about it in the future. When he was about to leave, he couldn't help but hold hands with Ruoruo and look at her sister. He was speechless and choked. He carefully warned Xijia about the problem of earning money, bowed to his father, and saluted Lady Lu. Only then did he return to his bedroom. He was about to take off his clothes and go to bed to comfort his poor little wife when he found his brother-in-law, the silly Dabao, was in the room. Fan Xian smiled slightly and said a few words to Dabao. Lin Wanner watched from the side and felt it was strange. The relationship between her husband and her brother was truly strange. She didn't know how the two of them had so much to talk about, and she didn't know why Fan Xian was so patient. After a long time, Fan Xian and Dabao giggled and placed their right hands on each other's shoulders. They shouted something like a slogan before allowing the servants to lead Dabao out. "What are you talking about with Dabao?" Lin Wanner pitifully hugged the thin blanket and looked at him. She pouted as if she was jealous of her brother. Her bare feet were exposed outside the edge of the blanket. Her snow-white feet were exceptionally beautiful under the yellow blanket. Fan Xian smiled slightly and sat on the side of the bed. He stretched out his hand and gently stroked his wife's feet. His fingers playfully tickled the soles of her feet. He replied. He promised little Xian Xian that if little Xian Xian doesn't stay in the capital to play with him, he will be good. Lin Wanner felt the soles of her feet go numb. Hearing this flirtatious double entendre, her snow-white face suddenly reddened. Even the tips of her ears were a bit red. She looked very cute. She quickly pulled back her feet and said shyly, "It's still early." Fan Xian teased. "Not early, not early. We leave tomorrow. We have to do it as soon as possible." "Right, did father have you go during the day?" Lin Wanner bumped into her husband, who was gentle and refined in front of others, but shameless and lewd in private. She really didn't know what to do, so she could only play a diversion. But she had played this trick too many times, and Fan Xian had long become immune to it. "Father-in-law scolded me. First, he scolded me about the exam, and then he scolded me about the mission to Northern Qi. I refused to listen to my father and his arrangements. In fact, when he entered the Prime Minister's manor that day, Fan Xian could clearly see his father-in-law's concern, but he didn't know where the old Prime Minister's concern came from. As he replied, his hands dishonestly moved up his wife's bare feet. In a moment, he went through the quilt, pulled out his 5 fingers and grabbed her soft feet. Wana let out a cry of surprise. As the husband and wife talked at night, they couldn't help but recall the situation in the Temple of Qing. Just as the sweetness was like a date, Fan Xian's heart thumped. He thought of Ku He, the great grandmaster of Northern Qi. He thought of the illusory temple. For some reason, his heart gradually grew heavy. Feeling his strangeness, Lin Wanner propped herself up and lazily rested her head on his chest. She smiled and said, "You are leaving tomorrow. What are you thinking about?" Feeling his wife's hair slide across his bare chest, he felt a slight itch. Fan Xian smiled and chased all those useless things out of his mind. His shifty eyes rolled around. His gaze passed through his wife's black hair and the color of the night and landed greedily on Wanner's mostly exposed chest. Wanner looked into his eyes and felt that her husband's clear eyes seemed to speak. His gentle gaze was purer than most girls'. One moment it seemed to say that he was thinking of her, And the next moment it seemed to say that he couldn't bear to leave. And the next moment it seemed to say that he would come back soon. Wait, why did it seem like he was saying something very vulgar? She followed Fan Xian's gaze, and found that her undergarments had long since slipped down to her waist. Her upper body was completely bare. She was extremely embarrassed, and with a soft cry, she quickly burrowed into the thin quilt. There was nothing else to look at. Fan Xian was angry at Wang Dong. He pretended to be angry and said, "You are an old married couple. Why are you still hiding?" Half of Lin Wanner's face peeked out from the thin quilt. She looked at her husband timidly, but there was a bashful smile in her watery eyes. Her covered lips whispered something. Fan Xian didn't understand. Lin Wanner's bare, white feet kicked lightly on the bed. She poked her face out of the thin blanket again, revealing her soft, tender lips. A lock of black hair fell on the side of her lips. She said shyly, "Didn't you say in the past to maintain that sense of mystery?" Fan Xian had long since been stunned by this sexy scene. How could he still maintain a sense of mystery at this time? Only a ghost would have a sense of mystery. He lifted the blanket, pulled his wife's soft body into his arms, and went with her to Mount Wu to view the scenery. After a long time, when the wind and rain had stopped and everyone was tired, Lin Wanner opened her lake-like eyes and said sleepily, "We have to come back soon." Fan Xian half closed his eyes. There was a trace of a satisfied smile at the corners of his lips. His fingers tangled with his wife's hair. In a quiet voice he said, "Don't worry, my luck in this life has been off the charts. Everything has been smooth sailing, and nothing has happened." The next day, outside the Overwatch Council prison, the head of the prison that Fan Xian had seen once before, one of the former heads of the Overwatch Council, stood expressionlessly outside the iron gate. Fan Xian narrowed his eyes and looked at the former head of the 7th Bureau. He was shocked to find that there was a trace of unease in his eyes. The surroundings had long been filled with Overwatch Council spies and swordsmen of the 6th Bureau. A few carriages were parked outside the gate. Fan Xian stood about 10 steps away from the carriages. He found that all of his colleagues in the Overwatch Council seemed unreasonably nervous. These carriages were all specially made. The walls of the carriages were lined with iron plates. Perhaps the horses were tired or nervous, but they kept snorting. In such a tense atmosphere, Fan Xian couldn't help but frown. He thought of the rumors about the important figure who was about to be transferred out of prison. Xiao En, the head of Northern Wei spies. Back in the day, he had countless riders under his command. He swept across the world, planting spies in every country. He was an expert at manipulating people's minds, and was skilled at using poison. He had toppled the royal families of many small countries, and the number of people who had died at his hands, directly or indirectly, was enough to form a mountain of bones. Most frightening of all was that this once illustrious head of spies had an extremely brilliant mind and methods. Who knew how many times he had evaded assassination attempts from enemy countries? Back in the day, the king of Wei most relied on civil official Zhuang Mohan, and the military official he most relied on was Zhang Qingfeng. But the true pillar of the country was Xiao En, who had always been hidden in the shadows. At that time, the world was in chaos, and it was thanks to Xiao En's ruthlessness that he had eliminated some of the countries surrounding the kingdom of Qing. Not only did he bring Northern Wei territory, he also indirectly helped the kingdom of Qing stabilize its situation. But as the kingdom of Qing gradually rose, Xiao En's dark hand naturally reached south. In those years, the bureaucracy of the capital was in chaos. Before and after the death of the founding emperor, the two princes were at loggerheads, like fire and water. Behind this, of course, was Xiao En's instigation. Northern Wei's tens of thousands of riders had long been waiting for the two princes to fight for the throne. Then they would march south and swallow the kingdom of Qing into the kingdom of Wei. Coincidentally, at this moment, no one knew that a woman called Yi Qingmei had brought a blind young servant into the capital of the kingdom of Qing. The servant carried a black chest on his back. Thus, the two princes died mysteriously. Now that His Majesty's father, the previously peaceful Prince Cheng, had ascended to the throne, the kingdom of Qing did not suffer any real losses. The capital gradually settled down, and Northern Wei lost its best opportunity to invade. It was at this time that a man called Chen Pingping gradually appeared on the stage of history. Chen Pingping had originally been a servant in King Cheng's manor, but for some reason, he had gained the trust of King Cheng's crown prince, and had followed him his entire life. And when the Overwatch Council, a strange and unconventional organization, was established, Chen Pingping became the head of the council, and remained so until today. At first, people did not know what the Overwatch Council did, nor did they know that the shadow of the mistress of the Yi family was still behind the council. They only knew that Chen Pingping's ruthlessness was gradually revealed, and that his talent for manipulating the Dark Knight was also gradually revealed. The two most terrifying secret organizations in the world were subordinate to the two most powerful countries. As the situation between Northern Wei and the Kingdom of Qing grew more and more tense, they began to secretly attack each other. One year, the Kingdom of Qing finally took the risk of carrying out its first northern expedition. This action of smashing a rock with an egg finally failed miserably in front of Northern Wei, the most powerful country in the world. In front of Zhang Qingfeng's cavalry and Xiaowen's heavy spy network, the crown prince, who was now the emperor, was repeatedly defeated, and finally almost died in the mountains and rivers of the north. It was Chen Pingping who led a group of black knights through the treacherous battlefield that saved the crown prince's life. At the same time, he ordered the spies of the Overwatch Council hidden in Shangjing of Northern Wei to begin spreading rumors, bribing high-ranking officials, and framing General Zhang Qingfeng. After a number of sacrifices, a crack finally appeared in the battlefield in the mountains of the north. The road back to the kingdom was long and dangerous. Many times, when the troops were in desperate straits and ran out of food and water, Chen Pingping, who was not as old as he was now, expressionlessly left all the food for the crown prince and his subordinates, while he drank horse urine and ate grass. In the end, only a tenth of the Black Knights made it back to the capital. On the way back, he relied on a female prisoner of Dongyi to serve the crown prince, who was heavily injured and recovered. This female prisoner of Dongyi was the mother of the great prince of Qing, Lady Ning of the palace. Even after a long time, people were still guessing what kind of plot Chen Pingping had used to make a great general like Zhang Qingfeng lose the trust of the Northern Wei royal family. But no one had a real answer, not even the Empress Dowager of the Kingdom of Qing. Only some people vaguely knew that it was related to the secret affairs of the Empress of Northern Wei. From that day on, Chen Pingping gained the absolute trust of the emperor and the crown prince. At the same time, a phrase began to spread throughout the world. In the north was Xiao En, in the south was Chen Pingping. Chapter 183. The heavy iron door was slowly pulled open. The well-oiled mechanism did not creak, but this silent pressure made the people of the Overwatch Council, who were guarding the door, feel nervous. Fan Xian lowered his head slightly, and his left eyelid twitched. He felt a faint chill coming from behind the iron door. It seemed that this man, who should have been in his 70s or 80s, who should have lived only in the pages of history, after being imprisoned for 20 years, still exuded the aura of a secret agent. The sound of the iron chains dragging across the stone floor was somewhat ear-piercing. The sound grew louder and louder, indicating that the man inside was getting closer and closer to the iron door. Fan Xian raised his head and looked calmly at the iron door. He thought about how Chen Pingping had led the Black Knights in a surprise attack during the Second Northern Expedition, and how he had captured Xiaowen, who had secretly returned to his hometown to attend a wedding, and brought him back to Northern Qi. But because of this, Chen Pingping's legs were crippled. This Xiaowen was truly a powerful man. After Xiaowen was captured by the Kingdom of Qing, the Kingdom of Qing went on another northern expedition. After 3 northern expeditions, the once insufferably powerful Northern Wei was beaten to the brink of death. In the end, it split into countless smaller countries. Directly inheriting Northern Wei's power, and most of its territory, was the Northern Wei Jidushi, the Zhan family, who established the country as Qi. This was the origin of the Kingdom of Northern Qi. Back then, General Zhang Qifeng had been demoted for no reason, and Northern Wei had fallen apart. In the end, It was the Jean family who had emerged from this terrible mess. This was truly a strange thing. The spring sun shone gently through the tall trees outside the prison and onto the iron door, leaving mottled marks on the door. At the same time, it lightly imprinted itself on the old man's face. The sound of the iron chains dragging across the floor suddenly stopped, and an old sigh rang out. Outside the iron door, the 4 swordsmen of the 6th Bureau of the Overwatch Council gripped their ropes tightly, as if they were facing a great enemy. They were far away from the shackles, and there was a man in the shackles. His hair was a mess, and his wrists and feet were shackled with steel, but his clothes were very clean. That old sigh came from the wrinkled lips under the disheveled hair. After the sigh, the old man faintly sighed again. The taste of sunlight, it's been a long time. This was of course Xiao En, who had been locked up by the kingdom of Qing for 20 years. Seeing him walk out of the celestial prison, the guards of the Overwatch Council grew nervous. It was as if they could smell the sweet scent of blood in the air. Fan Xian frowned slightly. This man's aura could easily drive someone mad. Everyone gripped their swords tightly in their hands, or their fingers tightened on the triggers of their crossbows, aiming at the tall but stooped old man. A dull thud resounded. The former head of the 7th Bureau, who was now a prison guard with turbid eyes, walked forward and smacked Xiaoen's back with a rod for no reason at all. Xiaoen didn't seem to feel anything. He slowly turned his head to look at the former head of the 7th Bureau of the Overwatch Council. He let out a soft breath and blew away his messy hair, revealing a pair of cold, serene eyes and a pair of withered lips. In a raspy voice he said, "Old neighbor, we've lived together for 20 years. I'm about to leave, and you're just going to send me off like this?" The former head of the 7th Bureau slowly closed his eyes and lowered the rod in his hand, as if afraid of Xiaoen's eyes. He took 2 deep breaths and said, "These are all young people. Why must you provoke them? If they accidentally kill you now, I don't think you'll be satisfied." Xiaoen slowly blinked and looked at the handsome young man in the crowd surrounding him. Fan Xian noticed that he was looking at him. He forced his Jinshi to steady his mind and smiled back. Xiaoen was a little surprised that such a young man could be so calm. He shook his head and said to the prison guard, "I'm leaving the kingdom of Qing. I don't think you'll have to stay in the celestial prison any longer. But I think you must be hoping that I'm dead. Otherwise, I'll find a way to make you pay me back for the 20 years we've been together." The prison guard was expressionless. "I wish you a safe journey. Don't ever come back." Xiaoen laughed hoarsely. "I'll definitely come back." He looked at the prison guard's face and said, emphasizing each word, "No matter how much you torture me, I'll use it on your children." The prison guard closed his eyes. He knew that if Xiaoen could regain control of the dark forces of northern Qi, then he would be able to exact his revenge on him. It would be extremely difficult for him to protect his family. Xiaoen threw his head back and laughed. The heavy chains on his body began to clang, as if he was afraid that this terrifying figure would soon be freed. The people of the Overwatch Council were incredibly nervous. Only Fan Xian, hearing the hatred in his opponent's laughter, felt slightly nervous and narrowed his eyes. He still didn't understand why the eldest princess was playing this game. The air outside the Overwatch Council's prison was incredibly tense. It was as if there was a faint bloody light emanating from the man in the shackles. At that moment, there was a creaking sound, and the ordinary, black wheelchair slowly approached the shackles. Fei Jie was pushing the wheelchair, and Chen Pingping was sitting in it. The wheelchair didn't make a loud sound, but it was like a bell that shook everyone out of their nervousness. Everyone saw that the director had arrived, and for some reason, they all let out a collective sigh of relief. They were nervous facing Xiaoen, because they didn't know what this legendary figure would do once he was released from prison. Chen Pingping's arrival put everyone at ease, because all the officials of the Overwatch Council deeply believed that as long as Director Chen was here, Xiaoen could not rebel. Chen Pingping slowly raised his head and looked at the old acquaintance in the shackles. "What are you laughing at?" His voice carried a trace of disdain and a trace of amusement. Xiaoen, with his head full of disheveled hair, looked at Chen Pingping in the wheelchair and suddenly said, "I'm laughing at the fact that your legs were destroyed by my hands." Chen Pingping smiled and shook his head. I thought you were laughing at your tragic life. You've been locked up by me for 20 years. What else do you need to say? I'm the victor, and you're the loser. This is a fact that history has long determined, and you will never be able to change it. Xiaoen roared, and his white hair flew back like swords. In his rage, he took 2 steps forward, and the chains shook violently. The 4 swordsmen of the 6th Bureau, who were holding the shackles, exerted all their strength to hold him back. The 2 forces clashed, and a cloud of dust rose in front of the prison. Chen Pingping, however, was not nervous at all. He looked at him with pity. You're already so old. How can you still be so angry? Xiaoen suddenly closed his eyes and faced the sky. After a long time, he opened them again, and a cold light shone from them. Chen Pingping, do you really dare to let me go back to the north? Chen Pingping smiled. Go back and enjoy your retirement. Behave yourself. I'm also old now, and I can't be bothered to go so far to catch you. Xiaoen's voice was as sharp as a knife, and his aged voice was like the rust on a knife. It scraped against everyone's ears. My son died by your hand at the wedding. I don't think you'll ever have the chance to catch me again. Chen Pingping waved his hand, and Fan Xian walked over with a smile on his face. The closer he got to Xiaoen, the more he felt his innate coldness, but his expression remained unchanged. We're already old. What else can you do? If one day I have to catch you. Chen Pingping smiled. Xiaoen, this is Fan Xian. He's my successor. He'll be with you on this trip to the north. I don't think you'll be lonely. Xiaoen turned slightly, and the shackles clanged against the chains again. The old man gazed at this young, handsome official of the Overwatch Council through the strands of hair in front of his eyes. He didn't say anything for a while. Only now did Fan Xian see clearly the lingering hatred in Xiaoen's eyes. Pushing the wheelchair, Fei Jie slowly said, Sir Xiaoen, I was the one who poisoned the wedding. Coincidentally, Fan Xian is my student. Chen Pingping and Fei Jie smiled at the same time. Fan Xian smiled at the perfect moment. Senior Xiaoen, if there's anything in the future, I'll be the one to accompany you. Xiaoen chuckled, but there was no joy in his laughter. It was cold and murderous. His greatest defeat in this life had been given to him by Chen Pingping and Fei Jie. He had never imagined that the young man, who would be escorting him back to the north, would have such a deep connection with them. He tilted his head slightly to look at Fan Xian. You're still too young. You'll have to be careful on the road. Fan Xian bowed politely. I'll learn from you on the road. The grass by the side of the road was as fine as jade. Low branches hung in the sky beside the carriages. The silent carriages left the prison of the Overwatch Council and followed Tianhe Avenue to the north of the city. Along the way, the city patrol yamen had set up checkpoints. There was no one on the long street, only soldiers standing guard. In the distance, a few crossbowmen of the 6th Bureau could be seen, occupying the eaves of a few buildings. The side gate of the palace was closed. The commander of the palace, Gong Dian, looked coldly at the carriages in the distance. Suddenly he said, I admire Fan Xian. The general beside him frowned. Sir, Gong Dian's lips curled up. You've never had any dealings with Xiaoen, so you don't know how dangerous this trip will be. Fan Xian's name is known throughout the land, and he's a member of the royal family. There's no need for him to go to northern Qi, but this kid has the guts to accept this mission. I really admire him. Fan Xian sat in the first carriage and closed his eyes to rest. The real diplomatic mission had left the capital the day before. Fan Xian and his entourage, including himself, had been delayed to the inn because of the secret agreement to trade Xiaoen for Yin Bingyan. Last night, he had prevented his family from seeing him off. His entire mind was focused on this mission. Fan Xian seemed to be falling asleep with the rise and fall of the carriage, but he was thinking about many things. Aside from Xiaoen, Sea Lily's plan for the House of Red Sleeves was also very tricky. Only now did he remember that the gentle woman he had spent a night with was in the carriage behind him. He couldn't help but be slightly startled. At that moment the carriage jolted. He knew that the carriage had rolled over the stone ridge at the north gate of the capital. Chapter 184. As soon as they left the capital, the sun dimmed. The carriages passed by the pavilion without stopping, and the willow trees on the main road sent them off as they slowly made their way north. The officers and soldiers of the city patrol escorted the diplomatic mission 18 miles out of the capital before returning, handing over the task of keeping an eye on the defenses along the way to the capital garrison. The diplomatic mission's primary means of transportation were carriages, and there were more than 10 of them. Aside from carrying people, most of the space was reserved for ceremonial preparations for the trip north. Xiaowen's shackles had not been removed, and he was locked up in the second carriage. There was also an official from the Overwatch Council in charge of his daily life. The official smiled and carefully wiped the face of this serious criminal with a towel. The towel was very soft, and it did not hurt Xiaowen's old and withered face. If I capture you and use you to threaten that young man named Fan, would it have any effect? The chains clanked, and Xiaowen's old voice rang out in the carriage. But his words revealed a sense of carelessness, as if he had already guessed the answer. The official in charge of his daily life smiled warmly and said sincerely, "Mr. Xiao, since it is my turn to serve you, naturally I am prepared to be restrained by you. But as a citizen of the kingdom of Qing, when the time comes, I will have to commit suicide by poison, so as not to make things difficult for the people of the council." Xiaowen closed his eyes, and the cold aura around him gradually faded. "My hair is too long," he said quietly. "Help me tie it up." The conversation between the two seemed to have missed something. Xiaowen was currently restrained by the chains, so how could he restrain this official of the Overwatch Council? Perhaps both of them knew that once they left the capital, these thin chains would not be able to restrain the terrifying Xiaowen forever. The official walked to Xiaowen's side and took out a comb from a small cupboard. He carefully combed Xiaowen's snow-white hair, which reached his waist. His fingers were strangely steady and did not tremble in the slightest. Decades ago, Xiaowen had been one of the few ninth-level masters in the world. If he had not been imprisoned in the Overwatch Council for 20 years, suffering great torture, and having his body and spirit damaged by the poisons of the Third Bureau, people would have guessed that he would have long ago become a grandmaster. Even so, Binghu still had some power. Just by looking at the Overwatch Council's expression, as if they were facing a great enemy when he came out of prison, as well as the power that naturally seeped out of his body, one could tell that this old man still possessed terrifying power. If Xiaowen were to suddenly launch an attack at this moment, this middle-aged official probably wouldn't even have the slightest room to resist. However, he still maintained a steady smile, his expression calm and composed. Xiaowen glanced at him appreciatively. He knew that Xiaowen had most likely already made up his mind. Once he was subdued, he would immediately commit suicide by ingesting poison. He just didn't know where the poison was hidden on his body. "Is the Qing kingdom really so good that you would willingly and even happily guard me, a demon, by my side?" This was something that Xiaowen had always been puzzled about. The bureaucracy of the Qing kingdom was clearly corrupt, and yet the Northern Wei kingdom, that he had once served, had fallen apart overnight. Although part of this was because he and Zhang Qingfeng had been captured and lost their power, the Qing kingdom's military strength was still so tyrannical that it was somewhat illogical. The middle-aged official respectfully said, "If I die, the council will take care of my family's future. When my child turns 12, he can receive honors, and I believe that Sir Fan Jr. will help me take care of him. Sir Fan Jr. is very rich. My life can be exchanged for so many things. It is truly worth it." Xiaowen flexed his wrists, and the sound of chains rang out again. He was a little annoyed. "Still the same old tricks. What is your name?" The middle-aged official laughed and replied, "My name is Wang Qinian." Xiaowen's carriage was the second in line. Fan Xian lifted the curtain of the driver's side and squinted at the carriage. He waved his hand to call over a tiger guard and quietly asked, "How are the people next to the carriage?" What were the tiger guards? This was back to the second conversation between Count Sinan and Director Chun Pingping outside the palace. In short, Minister Fan could not help but allocate a small portion of his secret power to the diplomatic mission, just as his son was about to leave the country. These tiger guards were all extremely powerful. Although they could not compare to the 6th Bureau of the Overwatch Council in terms of killing, and could not compare to the Fifth Bureau in terms of collective fighting power. These Tiger Guards were all carefully selected individuals. There was no need to doubt their loyalty to their master, and there was an indescribable fierceness about them. Of course, Fan Xian could vaguely guess that these Tiger Guards were actually controlled by his father on behalf of the emperor. Perhaps they also served to keep the Overwatch Council in check. But the power that kept the Overwatch Council in check was clearly not limited to the Tiger Guards. For Count Sinan to send these 7 Tiger Guards to accompany his son north, he must have received permission from the palace. Beside the first carriage was the leader of the Tiger Guards, surnamed Gauda. He respectfully replied, "Rest assured, young master. Although there are no people from the Sixth Bureau, we can guarantee our safety." Because these Tiger Guards were nominally Minister Fan's private armed forces, he addressed Fan Xian as young master rather than sir. But Fan Xian still felt it was a little strange, and he smiled. The soldiers of the Jingdo garrison surrounded and protected this strange diplomatic mission as they slowly advanced north. The armored soldiers were a little silent. After all, this was an idle mission. But the generals who knew the inside story were a little uncomfortable. Their silence represented a kind of humiliation. For more than a decade, the reigning emperor had led the armies of the kingdom of Qing on expeditions to the east and to the west. They had never suffered a single defeat, and the kingdom of Qing's army had long since become accustomed to victory. Last year, in what was defined as an impulsive border war, the kingdom of Qing was still the victor. But no one could have imagined that the victorious kingdom of Qing would be forced to make such a huge concession because of some very despicable matter, sending Xiao En back north with both hands. The rumors that Fan Xian had spread throughout the capital had long since spread to every corner of the world. So these generals also knew of the sinister role that the eldest princess had played in this matter. The military's dissatisfaction with the royal family seemed to be concentrated on that beautiful and crazy royal woman. This was something that Fan Xian still had no way of figuring out. Although the eldest princess was crazy, she was not stupid. What benefit did she gain from selling Mr. Yan, the head of Qing's northern spies, to northern Qi? If it was just to have Zhuang Mohan come to the capital to humiliate him, Fan Xian certainly did not believe that he had such an important position. If the eldest princess was seeking outside help from northern Qi for the sake of the future struggle for the throne, wouldn't this offend the majority of the military? No matter how he looked at it, this was a deal that did not make up for the losses. The diplomatic mission's carriages had already traveled north for half a day. The sun gradually sank into the mountains, and the light grew dimmer. The carriages began to rest by the edge of a large forest. The deputy commander of the diplomatic mission came to ask for instructions. According to the rules, the diplomatic mission should stop for the night at a relay station 3 miles ahead. Fan Xian thought for a while, and then shook his head. He ordered that they stop there for now, and that they would discuss it later. He then got out of the carriage, stretched the numbness that came with being immobile for so long, and strolled to the rear. The leader of the Tiger Guards, hand on his long knife, silently followed behind him. Fan Xian looked down and noticed that the Tiger Guard's knife was strangely long. He couldn't help but ask curiously, "Will it be inconvenient to draw it?" Under Wu Zhu's guidance, he paid particular attention to reaction speed in battle. He knew that the longer the weapon, the slower the weapon's owner's reaction would be. The leader of the Tiger Guards, Gauda, raised his long knife and calmly presented it to Fan Xian. He explained, "There's a mechanism, so we can draw the knife faster. Because I'm mainly responsible for covering and intercepting, the 7 Tiger Guards in this party all use long knives. We just want to increase the killing range." Fan Xian nodded, indicating that he should not follow. By now, he had already reached the side of the second carriage. He gently twitched his nose, as if he could faintly smell the scent of blood and ice coming from the carriage. He couldn't help but smile, thinking that if Wang Qinian and that old freak continued to stay together, they would eventually go crazy. Sure enough, as soon as he saw Fan Xian enter the carriage, Wang Qinian stood at the door of the carriage with a pained expression. "Sir, when can I rest?" "Wait for another 2 days." Fan Xian smiled and patted his shoulder. Has Xiaoan made any strange moves? Wang Qinian shook his head and calmly recounted Xiaoan's every move for the past half an hour to Sir Fan. Fan Xian listened calmly. He knew that Wang Qinian's words would certainly fall into Xiaoan's ears, but he was not worried. After a while he quietly said, "I'll go in and take a look." "It's dangerous." Wang Qinian shook his head disapprovingly. A sick tiger is still a tiger. Although Xiaoan is not as strong as he was once a 9th-level fighter. "If you're not careful and he captures you, what should we do?" Fan Xian replied, "Don't worry. Xiaoan is not an idiot. We're only a few miles from the capital. If he tries anything strange at this time, he'll be seeking his own death." Of course, he knew of Xiaoan's terrifying power. What did a 9th-level fighter mean? He only had to think of the time when he had snuck into the palace at night, and Yin Xiaoyi's arrow, which seemed to come from beyond the heavens, to understand. "And we'll be traveling together for a long time. Am I not going to see him?" Fan Xian laughed. In the gloomy carriage, Xiaoan's face was gloomy. His white hair had long since been tied up. Fan Xian held the small box he was carrying. He lifted the curtain and entered with a smile. "Mr. Xiao, we're going to northern Shangjing. It's a long way. Let's get some food and water first." Xiaoan slowly opened his eyes, and a cold light flashed in them. He smiled. "Thank you for your hard work, Sir Fan." Fan Xian did not seem to fear Xiaoan's methods at all. With a face full of smiles, he opened the lunchbox and carefully fed the desserts to the old man's still somewhat dry lips. Then he fed him some water. After a moment of silence, Xiaoan suddenly said, "These poisons are useless." Chapter 185. Naturally, the pastries contained Fan Xian's meticulous concoctions. They were essential for every household. And on this trip to the north, he could not afford to miss out on some good poison. Given Xiaoan's status, he would not resort to trickery. Seeing that Xiaoan had seen through him, Fan Xian smiled bitterly. "I believe that this powder has no smell at all. How did Mr. Xiaoan detect it?" Xiaoan looked at him, then slowly closed his eyes. "You are Fei Jie's student. No matter how you try to come up with your own ideas, you cannot escape Fei Jie's domain. In your prison, I ate Fei Jie's poisons for more than 10 years. He and Chen Pingping could not bear to kill me, so they could only use these poisons to damage my meridians. If it were you, eating pastry from a stall for more than 10 years, and suddenly one day, the old master of the stall takes in a new disciple, and makes another pastry, although it is made to taste like scallion oil, I think you would still be able to taste that it is from that stall." Deep in Fan Xian's heart, he sighed and said, "It's probably because the amount of flour and water at each stall is different." "Yes." Xiaoan smiled, but his smile was chilling. "It is the same with poisons. For an old man like me, the taste of poisons is no longer about the taste but the texture." Fan Xian opened his mouth, wanting to say something. In the end, he just smiled and sighed. What kind of realm is this? This is the realm of eating poisons as if they were rice. Since Xiaoan could taste the poison in the pastries, and still ate them calmly, the poison must have had no effect. Fan Xian continued with a smile. "There are 3 great masters of poisons in the world. My teacher is one, and the other is dead. I almost forgot that Mr. Xiaoan was one of the 3. You have overestimated yourself." Xiaoan flexed his wrists, and the chains clanked as Fan Xian delivered fresh water into his hands. After finishing the bowl of water, Xiaoan suddenly closed his eyes and smiled. "What if I have to go to the toilet? There is a toilet in the carriage. The sun is good outside. The sun has already set. It is good to see the night sky of the kingdom of Qing. The night is cold and the dew is heavy. Sir, you are old. You should stay in the carriage and rest." Of the 2, one old and one young, one closed his eyes and spoke softly, while the other responded with a smile. Xiaoan opened his eyes and said calmly, "I've been in prison for many years, and I've only seen a sliver of sunlight at the gate. Master Fan, would you allow me to go out and have a look?" Fan Xian shook his head firmly, but a smile still hung on his face. "It's very dangerous." "I'm not dangerous," Shan said gently. "Since you have already reached an agreement with the North, Anyone with the slightest bit of intelligence would know that following the diplomatic mission safely is the wisest choice for me. Fan Xian replied calmly, Mr. Xiao, before leaving the capital, the security of the diplomatic mission is the responsibility of the capital garrison. I think you should be able to guess why the kingdom of Qing is willing to return you to northern Qi. This is a very humiliating matter, so I am very worried that if you really do get off the carriage with your hands and feet shackled, many arrows might suddenly fly from afar and turn you into a porcupine. Xiao En knew that the words of this young man from the enemy kingdom were not false. He smiled and said, Don't you want to kill me? If I return to the north, within 3 years, I will certainly cause unbearable damage to your kingdom. Fan Xian shook his head. His handsome face was filled with confidence. I am not of the older generation, so I only have the respect of legends. I never thought that even if you returned to the north, you would still be able to summon wind and rain, as you did in the past. Of course, if I could kill you, that would be the simplest way to deal with it. But in comparison, I value the safety of the bargaining chip I exchanged with you more. So rest assured, I will ensure your life, all the way to the capital of northern Qi, and hand you over to your friends. Xiao En was silent. Fan Xian smiled and said, Up until now, I am still unable to accurately determine how much power you currently have, so I will be very careful along the way. As for the outside of your carriage, I will maintain sufficient power at all times to ensure that when you want to come out of the carriage to get some fresh air, we will be able to immediately respond accordingly. Xiao En laughed, but still did not say anything. Since his attempt to secretly poison Xiao En had been seen through, and it was clearly ineffective, then he could only resort to the barbaric method on the surface. Fan Xian let out a soft breath, then stood up. He stretched out his foot and stepped on the iron chains that bound Xiao En's hands. Strangely, he tied a piece of black cloth around Xiao En's elbow, then gently but rudely patted the back of the old man's hand. Then he took out a flat iron box from his bosom. Opening it, he took out a long, thin, and incredibly sharp needle. The thin needle tube was skillfully made hollow, and there was a bulge at the back of the long needle. It was unknown what material it was made of, but presumably it was a medicine storage device. Xiao En's eyes were bloodshot, and he stared coldly into Fan Xian's eyes. Fan Xian approached with the needle in hand, without a trace of panic. Suddenly, a very strange feeling arose in the carriage. Fan Xian's nose suddenly tasted something sweet, and the air was filled with the scent of blood, faintly red. This smell came from Xiao En's faintly angry body. Outside the carriage, the Tiger Guards and officials of the Overwatch Council immediately sensed the abnormality in the carriage. They silently rushed over, weapons in their hands. Wang Qinian, who was guarding the carriage, looked back and frowned slightly. He then waved his hand at the people beside the carriage, who looked as if they were facing a great enemy, indicating that there was no problem. In the carriage, Fan Xian slowly removed the thin needle from the back of Xiao En's hand. He took out a silk handkerchief and carefully wiped the tip of the needle, then raised his head and smiled. Thank you, Mr. Xiao, for your cooperation. He did not know what acupoint the needle had pierced, nor did he know what medicine had been poured into the needle. Xiao En's frightening aura had weakened considerably, and even his face seemed a little haggard. I respect you, but respect the elderly. Fan Xian walked out of the carriage. But you must remember, you are no longer the head spy of Northern Wei, nor are you a world-shaking villain. You are only my prisoner. If you try to escape, I have many ways to kill you. Sir, there is no need to be so careful. Wang Qinian accompanied him to sit under a tree by the road. He looked at Fan Xian's slightly tired face. If Xiao En wants to regain his freedom, he should cooperate with us and enter the borders of northern Qi. Fan Xian shook his head. You don't understand. For someone like Xiao En, even if he had been imprisoned for 10 or 20 years, so what? Look at his eyes. What is there other than hatred? There is also the frightening insight and the burning ambition. If he only wants freedom, then he will cooperate with us. But if he wants more, then he will certainly find a way to escape. The Overwatch Council's prison keeps a close eye on him, so he doesn't have a sliver of a chance. However, on this long road to the north, he has too many opportunities. Thus, I have to think of all ways to weaken his fighting ability and desire to fight, while ensuring his survival. Why would he want to escape? Because the regime in the north is not the northern way that he has served for many years, and was even imprisoned for. It is northern Qi. Fan Xian smiled. Although the royal family of northern Qi is the Zhan family, and Marshal Zhan Qingfeng was on good terms with Xiao En, the dynasty has changed. Xiao En has been imprisoned for so many years, and I don't know how the royal family of the north will treat him. If the royal family of northern Qi feels that he still has value, then naturally they will treat him as an honored guest. But if there is no such benefit, think about it. If the royal family of northern Qi goes crazy, will they allow a terrifying spy leader like Xiao En to establish a foothold in Shangjing again? Then why is northern Qi willing to trade Master Yin for Xiao En? Because of two people. Fan Xian didn't go into detail. One is Zhuang Mohan and the other. I guess it should be that famous northern general called Shang Shanhu. Sir, do you think that Xiao En risked his life to escape because he doesn't trust the royal family of northern Qi? Fan Xian thought of what Wu Zhu had said to him, and sighed faintly. People in our line of work don't trust anyone. As for Xiao En, he must have other plans, but I can't guess what they are. All I know is that he must reach Shangjing alive. It's that simple. Where will Xiao En make his move? Before leaving the country? If he enters northern Qi, then even if he escapes, it will still be northern Qi's responsibility, Fan Xian said lightly. Since Xiao En wants northern Qi to recognize his position, he can't mess up this agreement, said Fan Xian lightly. He suddenly stood up and yelled, "Today we won't go to the relay station. We'll set up camp in the wilderness." His subordinates responded in unison, and went to organize the arrangements for setting up camp. Wang Qinian looked at Fan Xian with some doubt. Fan Xian shook his head. It's a bit of training and getting used to it. After leaving Sangzhou, there won't be any relay stations in the north that can be used. Taking advantage of the fact that we're not far from the capital, let your subordinates get used to the atmosphere as quickly as possible. Fighting in the wilderness is not playing house. Wang Qinian saw that Fan Xian was still worried, and very tactfully began to play the role of a sidekick. Fan Xian lightly clapped his hands, smiled, and waved for him to leave. Then he sat silently under the tree, looking at the carriage, and thinking about the old man inside. I don't want you to suddenly change your name to Shawshank. Earlier, when injecting poison into the carriage, Fan Xian had still been a little nervous. He didn't know whether or not Xiao En would suddenly attack. After several investigations, he still didn't know how much power this 9th-level ace, who was one of the best in the world, had retained after more than 10 years in prison. But he knew that until the best opportunity came, the terrifying Xiao En would be very obedient. The mountain wind blew from the forest behind Fan Xian, blowing through the sweat-soaked clothes on his back. It was damp and cold. After a while, he stood up expressionless, and walked toward Sea Lily's carriage. Chapter 186. Time can change many things, including a person's appearance and mental state, but there are exceptions. When Fan Xian stepped into Sea Lily's carriage, the first thing he saw was a slightly haggard, but still beautiful woman. Half a year in prison did not seem to have done any damage to the face of the most popular woman on Lujing River. Seeing Fan Xian enter, Sea Lily bowed slightly. Her eyes were slightly flustered, as if she did not know how to address him. It seemed that she was not prepared for this meeting. Fan Xian quietly looked at the girl's face. He found that her eyebrows were still soft like willow branches, and her black eyes were still moving. However, her lips had not been colored today, so they looked a little pale. When the two of them first met, Fan Xian was the illegitimate son of a nobleman who had just arrived in the capital. Sea Lily was already the most popular woman on Lujing River. That night he caressed her crazily. Although he had not truly reached ecstasy, he had done all the most intimate things between a man and a woman. But he had not expected that Sea Lily was a spy planted in the Qing kingdom by northern Qi. Through the second prince's invitation, she and Wu Bowen had set up a plan to assassinate Fan Xian. Fan Xian was lucky enough to escape that disaster. In the end, He entered the Overwatch Council, and now he had taken on the duty of returning Sea Lily to Northern Chi. He quietly looked at the eyes, nose, and lips of the woman in front of him. For some reason, he thought of the physical contact he had with her that night on the pleasure boat. Although his heart did not waver, there was still an indescribable feeling. After all, aside from the servant girls in Danjo, she was the woman he had been closest to before marriage. A few days ago, I rode by Lujing River. The silence in the carriage was broken by Fan Xian's gentle words. I saw that pleasure boat again. Sea Lily was slightly taken aback. She had not expected this handsome young man to use such a line as an opening remark. She had thought that what followed would be a very serious conversation. Fan Xian laughed. It's already very run down, but I don't think you will miss that place. Sea Lily smiled bitterly. I am a duckweed, a guest on the Four Seas. Please do not make fun of me, sir. I don't like the word me. Fan Xian looked at her watery eyes and smiled slightly. The affairs of the world are wondrous. When you wanted to kill me, it was because you had a mission. Although I won't forgive you, I won't hold any prejudice against you because of it. At the time in the Overwatch Council prison, I told you that as long as you gave up the mastermind, I would think of a way to let you live. However, I want to tell you clearly that I did not do anything to allow you to return to Northern Chi, so you don't need to thank me. Sea Lily raised her head in surprise. Her lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to say something. She couldn't understand this young man, who was sometimes pure and amiable, and sometimes cold and terrifying. Why did he say such things? From the day you left the prison, we've been colleagues. Fan Xian sat next to her and relaxed against the carriage. His nose picked up a faint fragrance, knowing that it was the girl's body fragrance. He enjoyed it a little and said, I don't know about the agreement between you and Chen Pingping, but since he believes you can be trusted, I will trust you. I hope you can trust me too, and that we can carry out the House of Red Sleeves plan. Sea Lily's hands clutched her lake green sleeves. She gently bit her lower lip, not knowing what to say. Give me a massage. I have to be on edge every day, not knowing when that old monster in the carriage will go berserk. It's a little stressful. Fan Xian wasn't lying. He really did look tired. Sea Lily made a sound of agreement and turned her body to the side. She knelt on the soft cushion of the seat and carefully placed her soft, warm hands on Fan Xian's head. She slowly rubbed it. Fan Xian closed his eyes and enjoyed the comfortable feeling in his head. He enjoyed the slow touch of Sea Lily's fingers and subconsciously sighed. What is it? Do you think it's too heavy? He didn't know what method Chen Pingping had used, but Sea Lily was no longer as desperate and determined as she had been in prison. Instead, she had returned to the way she had been on the pleasure boat, gentle and charming. Her soft voice slid across Fan Xian's heart. Fan Xian said gently, I was just thinking about how I tortured you. I was afraid I would break your beautiful little hands. Sea Lily's fingers, which had been rubbing Fan Xian's temples, paused. After a while she said quietly, It's not that easy to break someone's hands. Don't hold a grudge. That won't be good for our cooperation in Shangjing, Fan Xian said quietly. He didn't open his eyes. You wanted to kill me, and I only tortured you. No matter how you look at it, you owe me. Sea Lily bit her lower lip again. Her pearly white teeth pressed against her lips, creating a soul-stealing charm. A soft light flickered in her eyes. I owe you. You can take it back at any time. How? Like the first night? Fan Xian opened his eyes, full of mockery. Sea Lily stubbornly opened her eyes to meet his. After a long silence, she looked at this handsome young official. For some reason, she thought of the shameful incident that night on the pleasure boat. Her body felt soft and weak. She slowly leaned over, half leaning on Fan Xian's shoulder. Her fingers kept massaging him, and she said quietly, All women in this world have a hard life. I don't know how you intend to take it. That night on the pleasure boat, Fan Xian had used an aphrodisiac, so Sea Lily's reaction had been extremely strong, and she had remembered it to this day. Later in the prison, Fan Xian had mercilessly tortured her. Aside from her hatred, she also had a very strange feeling. Fan Xian felt a springy softness on his right shoulder. Without thinking, He knew it was Sea Lily's soft chest. He thought she was trying to seduce him, so he took a deep breath to calm his mind. Unexpectedly, he inhaled the faint fragrance of a young woman. His heart stirred. He turned his head and smiled. Where did that Sea Ling go? He's still locked up in the capital. Sea Lily's face showed no expression. It seemed that Sea Ling wasn't her real family. Fan Xian became more and more curious. What method had Chen Pingping used to make Sea Lily listen to the Overwatch Council? He thought for a moment, then frowned. You're not a pitiful person. At least, the young emperor of Northern Qi still remembers you. Sea Lily furrowed her brows and sighed. How long will it last if you use your looks to influence others? That's what I'm confused about. Fan Xian smiled. I don't know if you can tell me in detail about your past with the emperor of Northern Qi, so that when we get to Shangjing, we can make arrangements for you to enter the palace. The so-called Red Sleeve Plan, in Fan Xian's eyes, was just another version of Shishi's entry into Wu. From the contents of this secret agreement, it could be seen that the emperor of Northern Qi had some affection for Sea Lily. Otherwise, he wouldn't have deliberately emphasized her return. But Sea Lily's background was a bit low. Even if Northern Qi respected her for her service to the country, it was only respect. Compared to the kingdom of Qing, Northern Qi paid more attention to one's birth and bloodline. They couldn't allow a woman, who had once been a prostitute, to enter the palace. Sea Lily didn't seem to want to talk about the past. She only lowered her head and said quietly, Master Fan, don't worry. Once I get to Shangjing, the emperor of Northern Qi will worry about what happens next. The carriage once again fell silent. Fan Xian sat beside the woman, smelling her faint fragrance. For some reason, he regretted leaving her fingers earlier. After sitting quietly for a while, he slowly opened his mouth and said, Then rest well, Mississippi. Unexpectedly, Sea Lily spoke at the same time. Master, do you want a massage? That's fine, Fan Xian replied quickly. All right. There was a trace of disappointment in Sea Lily's reply. It wasn't until this strange question and answer session was over that the atmosphere in the carriage became a bit strange. It was as if they had all vaguely sensed something. A wave of ambiguity began to brew, and the air gradually grew warmer. Sea Lily bit her lower lip again and knelt on the chair. She pressed down on Fan Xian's shoulders with both hands, secretly applying pressure. She thought to herself that she just didn't want to stay alone in the carriage, so she was willing to serve her enemy. Fan Xian smiled, feeling the soft body of the woman behind him. He thought to himself, not only does this woman not hold a grudge, but she's purposely trying to please me. Why? Could it be that she likes me? As soon as he made this guess, Fan Xian hurriedly slapped himself in the face. He warned himself that although he was Panin, he wasn't someone who emitted the scent of an aphrodisiac. Why did he want to stay in Sea Lily's carriage? Fan Xian frowned, trying to find an answer to convince himself. Perhaps there was some unease in his heart about going to Northern Qi. Or perhaps it was because Shaoan was too ugly, or perhaps he was nothing at all. He was a normal man, and Sea Lily was a beautiful woman whose naked body he had once touched. Wanting to stay with her was a very normal thing. Fan Xian didn't linger long in the land of tenderness. He considered himself a lustful man, but he was also a man of unswerving determination. He wouldn't be unable to extricate himself from the tenderness. He just let Sea Lily massage his body to get rid of some of his tiredness, and then he stepped out of the carriage. Wang Qinian went to greet him and accompanied him to the back of the envoy's carriage. He said quietly, Master, be careful of the eyes and ears around you. After all, Sea Lily will be given to the Emperor of Northern Qi. In the future, you will be staying in the carriage for so long. Let me clear the area first, lest any rumors spread to Shangjing and affect your future plans. Fan Xian knew that his confidant was thinking the wrong thing, but he didn't say anything. He just gently rubbed his temples. Chapter 187. After leaving the capital, the diplomatic mission immediately sped up. Along the way, they were no longer accompanied by the disdainful gazes of the garrison generals from afar. The members of the diplomatic mission, including the officials of the Overwatch Council, appeared to be much more relaxed. It was now the third month of spring, and the further north they went, the richer the colors of spring became. It was truly a strange sight. Along the way, there were local officials who received them. They all knew that this diplomatic mission was headed to northern Qi, and naturally, none of the officials dared to slight them. Furthermore, the leader of this diplomatic mission was the famous Sir Fan Jr., so the local officials were especially attentive in receiving them. Although they did not dare to delay the diplomatic mission's schedule, every time they arrived, there was always a feast. Beautiful women came to keep them company, and at the banquet, there was no stopping flattery for Fan Xian. Only now did Fan Xian realize how famous he was in the kingdom of Qing. He couldn't help but feel a little smug, and at the beginning of the banquets he refused no one. But after going so many times, he couldn't help but grow tired. And every time, he had to repeat his vow that he would no longer compose poetry. It was truly troublesome. Wang Qinian quite liked going, because the dancers at the banquets wore light muslin, and it was very entertaining. Every time they went, the local officials would extravagantly arrange for the local popular girls to accompany them. Every night, they would have hundreds of tricks up their sleeves. How could the sallow women in the capital compare? But this arrangement did not appeal to Fan Xian, because there was a girl in the diplomatic mission that even the emperor of northern Qi could not forget. See Lily, the most popular girl in the capital. As a result, Fan Xian gradually stopped attending banquets. He only chose to speak with some of his father's old acquaintances and high-ranking officials. Most of the time, he stayed at the diplomatic mission's encampment. On the one hand, he watched over Shaowen, and on the other, he could spend more time in Sea Lily's carriage. Counting on his fingers, it had been more than half a month since they left the capital. During this time, Fan Xian spent most of his time in Sea Lily's carriage. That's right. A group of men would get tired of listening to the crosstalk. How could it compare to chatting with a beautiful woman in a carriage? Sea Lily carefully peeled the orange, then carefully scraped away the white tendons, before putting the orange into Fan Xian's mouth. In the diplomatic mission, Fan Xian was the most powerful, and the officials of the Overwatch Council followed his lead. The Tiger Guards were even more loyal. No matter what he did, no one dared to say anything. But as Fan Xian closed his eyes and slowly chewed on the orange, for some reason, he thought of his sister. When he was in the capital, Ruoro often served him fruits like this. Then he thought of his wife, Wanner, who was still at home. His eyes opened slightly, and through a small crack in his eyelids, he peeked at Sea Lily, who was concentrating on processing the oranges. A sense of unease welled up in his heart. During the journey, he and Sea Lily didn't do much. They just chatted, ate some fruit, and passed the time. They didn't even mention their plans for Shangjing in the northern Qi kingdom. Of course, they occasionally rubbed their tired bodies, held hands, or hugged each other to look at the scenery outside the window. What are you thinking about? Seeing Fan Xian in a daze, Sea Lily smiled sweetly. These days together, all she saw was Fan Xian's gentle and delicate side. She had actually forgotten the horrible scene of him bullying the weak in the celestial prison. The girl seemed to like the feeling of sitting and chatting in the carriage. Deep in her heart, she secretly hoped that the journey would never end. I'm thinking, you've been taking good care of yourself these days. Your plumpness is gradually returning. Fan Xian teased. When we first left the capital, your body made my hands hurt. Sea Lily blushed slightly. Then don't touch me. Fan Xian smiled and took her hand. Holding her wrist, he pulled her into his arms. His palms slowly stroked her body. You don't like it? I've had a hard life. You bullied me, drugged me on the pleasure boat, tortured me in the celestial prison, and now I can't escape your evil clutches in this carriage. Sea Lily said this, but her whole body was in Fan Xian's arms. She felt that this young man's embrace was very warm, and she didn't want to leave. She felt Fan Xian's hand moving on her bottom through her clothes. Her heartbeat was a little erratic. Her red lips opened slightly, and she blew into Fan Xian's ear. Fan Xian's ear felt hot and itchy, and his palm unconsciously tightened. Sea Lily called out softly, her voice like silk. She panted softly in his ear. Take me. Going to Shangjing won't end well anyway. After a moment, Fan Xian smiled and jumped out of the carriage. There was a hint of strangeness in his smile. There was poison in Sea Lily's body, a slow-acting poison. Fan Xian had long found out that it had been planted by the Overwatch Council in advance. Fan Xian had seen this poison in the books teacher Fei had left behind, but he had never seen it in real life. This poison would slowly spread through a woman's body, and then spread to a man through intercourse. As long as the Northern Qi Emperor and Sea Lily slept together, he could be infected with this poison. The symptoms were very similar to a common venereal disease. No wonder Chen Pingping was so serious. It turned out that the House of Red Sleeves was not a copy of Shishir entering Wu, but a plan to poison people. There was no cure for this poison, but it could effectively weaken a person's body and mind. Think about it. If the Northern Qi Emperor really loved Sea Lily, and spent every night with her, he would soon fall seriously ill. And given the current situation of the Northern Qi Emperor, and the Emperor's factions confronting each other, if the young Emperor fell seriously ill, Northern Qi's court would once again descend into chaos. Fan Xian sighed. Sea Lily knew there was poison in her body, but she thought it was just a method the Overwatch Council used to control her. She didn't know it could be transmitted to the men she slept with. What made him uncomfortable was that Chen Pingping hadn't told him about this. If he hadn't felt something strange when he was intimate with Sea Lily, he wouldn't have discovered it. Of course, even if he had been infected with this poison, he could immediately be cured, but the feeling of being kept in the dark was still not good. The House of Red Sleeves? He smiled bitterly in his carriage. So it's the House of White Sleeves to summon the soul. He knew that compared to Chen Pingping, Fei Jia, and even Xiao In the carriage behind him, his methods were not vicious enough, and his heart was not cold enough. Sea Lily was just a pawn that could be discarded at any time. But he didn't know what Chen Pingping had promised her to make her willingly become a pawn covered by a black cloth. But what truly shocked Fan Xian was something else. This was the real reason why nothing had actually happened between Fan Xian and Sea Lily for more than 10 days. Sea Lily was still a virgin. The diplomatic mission had already arrived in the northern part of the Kingdom of Qing. Ahead of them was the last large city in the north of the Kingdom of Qing, Sangzhou. Looking at the city from a distance, Fan Xian narrowed his eyes slightly. He found that the color of the sky had darkened. The northern wind was strong, and had scattered the spring air in all directions. Dark clouds covered the sky. It was truly an unpleasant weather. After the last provincial guard in charge of escorting them came to salute, they began to turn back. Only the diplomatic mission's own carriages were left. Although the carriages were very long, in the wasteland outside Sangzhou, they still seemed small and pitiful. How long will it take to leave Sangzhou and reach the border? Fan Xian squinted and gazed at the northern sky. Wang Qinian respectfully replied, "This time, we're going around the lake, so it's a bit further. It'll take at least 20 days. Fan Xian frowned. The real danger should be in these 20 days. He tilted his head slightly and looked at the carriage that had remained silent all this time. How is Xiaowen's current condition? Sir, you've been injecting him with a large dose of poison every day. I'm guessing he's been working hard to force the poison out, so he's been very quiet. Ever since he woke up a few days ago, he's become very quiet. It seems he's thinking about something. Be careful." Fan Xian sniffed. It seemed that the smell of blood in the carriage was getting stronger. "Yes, sir." Wang Qinian asked for instructions. "The provincial guard has already retreated. The Zhangzhou army is not at ease. Sir, you know what happened last time, when Sea Lily was escorted back to the capital?" Fan Xian smiled. "Don't worry. Once we pass Zhangzhou, we'll be the most at ease in terms of escorting them. I'm only worried about the internal problems of the diplomatic mission." As soon as he finished speaking, a group of cavalry appeared on a low hill far away from the edge of the wasteland. There were about 500 of them, and they were all wearing black armor. Under the dim sunlight, they emanated a cold, murderous aura. Wang Qinian smiled. "So the Black Knights are here. Then there's nothing to worry about." A gust of wind blew past, causing the gravel on the ground to roll. Wang Qinian and Fan Xian prepared to board the carriage and head toward Sangzhou. Fan Xian suddenly stopped and slowly turned his head. He found that Sea Lily had already stepped out of the carriage and was standing beside it, looking at him with a perplexed expression. Get someone to give Miss Seymour clothes. The further north we go, the colder it gets. Spring comes so damn late. Fan Xian seemed to speak calmly, but his heart trembled. These days, he had rarely seen Sea Lily's carriage. Wang Qinian looked at Fan Xian strangely, then waved his subordinates away. There were 3 handmaidens in the diplomatic mission. They were there to serve Sea Lily, the future wife of the Emperor of Northern Qi. But Fan Xian had been in Sea Lily's carriage for the past few days, so the 3 handmaidens could only follow behind the convoy. After a while, the handmaidens came to Sea Lily's side. They gave her a crimson cloak and advised her to return to the carriage to rest. Sea Lily allowed them to put the cloak on her, but she did not return to the carriage. She only looked at Fan Xian quietly, as if trying to figure out something from his face. The black knights in the distance, the frail woman in the crimson cloak close by, and the pale white sun hanging in the sky. It was a beautiful picture, but one that made one's heart feel powerless. Chapter 188. After leaving Sangzhou, the diplomatic mission, under the protection of the Black Knights, slowly but surely made their way north. Northern Qi was not to the north of the kingdom of Qing, but to the northeast. At the border of the 2 countries was a large number of powerless vassal states. On the easternmost coast was the largest city in the world, the most prosperous port, Dongyi. The route the diplomatic mission chose did not pass through the vassal states, because the more cities they passed through, the harder it would be to guard against them. Of course, the secret agreement between the 2 countries could not be carried out by Dongyi. If the once demented Sigejian suddenly went crazy and provoked a war between the 3 countries, who could bear the consequences? So the diplomatic mission followed the wasteland north, and then took a detour to the east at the Great Lake. Although the journey was a little long, it was quiet. Aside from a few mounted brigands, there shouldn't be any powerful forces with ill intentions. Silence. Xiaowen was silent. Sea Lily was silent. Even the most important person in the diplomatic mission, Fan Xian, was silent. Everyone had their own reasons for being silent. Fan Xian pulled the needle out of Xiaowen's hand and carefully examined the old man's weary face. Xiaowen suddenly opened his eyes, and a cold light shone from them, as if it were real. He smiled. I am thick-skinned. I am not afraid of being stared at. I have a question. Xiaowen slowly closed his eyes. Why did you tie that cloth around my arm? I can guess. This method makes my blood vessels stand out even more. But was it necessary for you to inject poison into my blood vessels so painstakingly? Yes. Fan Xian smiled. Intravenous injection was of course faster and fiercer than food poisoning. No one in the world knew how to use intravenous injection. But that did not mean Fan Xian did not know how to do it. The terrifying Xiaowen in front of him could not be affected by ordinary poisons, and his Jinqi was too astonishing. Only an intravenous injection would be effective. Xiaowen frowned. After a while he suddenly said, This method seems familiar, and I must admit, it is very effective. Unfortunately, I am really old and have forgotten who it was. Fan Xian was shocked, but his face showed no reaction. He smiled. Take your time, Mr. Xiao. Those cavalrymen in the distance should be Chun Pingping's underlings, right? Xiaowen suddenly said in a very casual tone. Fan Xian was slightly taken aback. He remembered that his carriage had no windows on either side, and that it was separated by a layer of iron plates. It was amazing that Chun Pingping knew about the situation of the Black Knights in the distance. He replied warmly, It is the Black Knights. That year's 1,000-mile raid was carried out by the ancestors of this cavalry. He was referring to the time, many years ago, when Chun Pingping had led the Black Knights to abduct Xiao In from his wedding. That incident was the greatest humiliation Xiao In had ever suffered in his life, and it had left him with an indelible wound. When are you going to kill me? Xiaowen asked in a very ordinary tone. There was not a trace of emotion in his voice. There was some kind of psychological hypnosis hidden in this series of questions. If it was an ordinary person, they might have subconsciously fallen into the trap. But Fan Xian was not an ordinary person. He was a little surprised and said, "What?" Shan smiled faintly, and a faint redness appeared in his squinted eyes. "I think Qin Pingping would not want me to return to the north." Fan Xian shook his head. "I don't care about the thoughts of the older generation. As long as I do my job well, that's all." "You are a very good young man." Xiaowen looked at him calmly. He slowly moved his wrist and put the heavy iron chain on the table. "Why do you say that, Mr. Xiao? We traveled together for many days. Although Master Fan often stayed in that girl's carriage, you did not forget your duty, because you were greedy for the pleasures of the night." Xiaowen said calmly, "The key is that you train twice a day in the morning and at night. You never stopped. This kind of perseverance, even when I was young, was far inferior to you." Fan Xian smiled. "Clumsy birds fly early. I know my strength is not enough, and my talent is not enough. Naturally I have to train more." Xiaowen shook his head. "Your talent is very good, and your strength is already very strong, but you have never challenged a truly strong individual, so you have not been able to stimulate the true strength of your body." Fan Xian quietly looked at the old man's aged face. His eyes were as deep as an ancient well. He couldn't help but think to himself, "Are you the first truly strong individual I will face alone?" After leaving Sangzhou, the diplomatic mission entered the area under the jurisdiction of the Northern Army. This was a grassland, and the military camp was 100 miles away. Fan Xian did not want to encounter the superior 9th level Yin Xiaoyi, so the diplomatic mission naturally took a detour. In any case, with the protection of the Black Knights along the way, no one in the world would dare to do anything to them. A few days ago, there had been a few mountain bandits who had sent scouts to investigate, but seeing the power of the diplomatic mission and the Black Knights in front of them, they had long since retreated into the mountains in fear, not daring to come out for months. Xiaowen remained silent, and so did Si Lily. She gradually became more and more haggard. Fan Xian looked coldly at the two people he had escorted, but he didn't know what he was thinking. After these days together, for some reason, he felt a little pity for Si Lily. First, he felt pity for her past, and second, he felt pity for her future misfortune. But Fan Xian was confident that his mind was clear. He would not do anything to save something small and lose something big. If something really did happen between him and Si Lily, then the Overwatch Council's plans in Northern Qi would be a big problem. He didn't know how the young emperor of Northern Qi knew that Si Lily was still a virgin. But if he found out that Si Lily had lost her chastity, then the Red Sleeve plan would naturally be rendered useless. But Fan Xian didn't seem to want to see Si Lily's somewhat confused face. It seemed that he didn't have enough confidence in himself, so he never boarded Si Lily's carriage again. Instead, he boarded Xiaowen's carriage more often. From this seemingly silent old man, he learned a lot of gossip and Jianghu's secrets from many years ago. On the one hand, he really wanted to learn a lot from this once most terrifying spy leader. On the other hand, Fan Xian didn't want Xiaowen to have too much time to plan a contingency plan. As the journey progressed and the temperature outside the carriage dropped, the conversation between the shadowy figures of old and young gradually shifted from Northern Wei to the present world. "No one can truly unify the world," Xiaowen said lightly, looking at him. These days, he had gradually gotten used to the conversation between him and Fan Xian. This young official named Fan Xian was indeed a good person to talk to. His Majesty the Emperor of our country had two chances. The first was after the Third Northern Expedition. Fan Xian frowned. Given the Kingdom of Qing's immense military power at the time, it was more than enough to go north and destroy Northern Qi. Xiaowen shook his head. "Although I was already in prison at the time and didn't hear any news, after listening to your explanation these days, I think that the Emperor of Qing suddenly stopped because of two reasons. One was internal problems in the court, and the other was that he encountered some powerful resistance. After making his choice, he felt that going north was a very risky idea." Fan Xian thought about it. At the time, the Yi family affair had not yet erupted, and the court was basically under the control of the emperor and his mother's subordinates. Logically speaking, there shouldn't have been any internal problems. As for external enemies, he frowned. Was there any power in the world that could stop the powerful kingdom of Qing? The temple. Xiaowen seemed to have guessed what Fan Xian was thinking, and gave him a reference. Fan Xian shook his head. An illusory object is not enough to resist human ambition, or perhaps the desire for power. To unify the world and unify the four seas is too tempting for an emperor. Xiaowen smiled and acknowledged his words. The North and South have been at war for years. Even if the South Kingdom of Qi were to be defeated, it would take at least a decade for them to truly stabilize the situation and destroy all the forces of restoration. Besides, don't forget Dongyi. It is the place where the ninth-level masters of the world are gathered. Although this power is not enough to protect the country and open up new territory, if it is combined into a stick, under the leadership of that idiot Siga Jian, it could really do some crazy things. The triangle is the most stable. The three countries stand in a tripod, and it is also the most stable structure. Fan Xian nodded. Even if there is a difference in strength between the three powers, whoever wants to break this balance first will most likely suffer a backlash. The kingdom of Qing's court is the same. Xiaowen looked at him with a faint smile. The emperor, the courtiers, and the seemingly crazy, but actually sinister eldest princess, make up the triangle you speak of. Whoever wants to break this balance first will suffer. These days Fan Xian didn't hide anything. He talked about the affairs of the kingdom of Qing's court. It wasn't a secret, and if this old man didn't die at his hands after returning to northern Qi, there must be many ways to find out. Fan Xian's temples ached faintly. He didn't know why, but he began to miss Sea Lily's gentle fingers. If everyone is smart enough, let's first maintain the current balance, he said quietly. Impossible. Xiaowen looked at him. Because you made the first move, the other side must have reacted. I'm willing to bet that the capital has long since become a pot of porridge. Master Fan, when you sent me back to the north, you missed this excitement. It is a pity. Fan Xian was surprised. He began to listen to Xiaowen's cold analysis of the situation in the capital. Chapter 189. Jingdou was far warmer than Beijiang. Early in the morning, flowers bloomed on the branches. Every night, tens of thousands of lights illuminated the spring bridge. It was very lively. 10 li of red candles reflected the river of flowers. It was a good time to enjoy the spring. But during the day, Jingdou was somewhat quiet. It seemed that both commoners and officials found it difficult to resist the sleepiness of spring. They were lazy and did not want to move much, so there were not many people on the streets. At noon, a scholar with a gloomy expression walked in from the east gate of the capital, supporting a woman. The expressions and movements of these two people did not seem like mother and son. They did not go to liven an inn. Instead, they went directly to an unremarkable manor in the west of Jingdou. Only a few people knew that the true owner of this manor was an imperial censor of the imperial censorate. The sleepiness of spring could not be resisted, but it could be awakened. One day in March, just like the day after the spring examinations, a few bolts of spring thunder struck out of nowhere. A patter of spring rain fell, soaking every building in Jingdou and every alley. After the 4th Bureau of the Overwatch Council returned from Jiangnan to the relevant corrupt officials and salt merchants, the examination hall fraud case was finally concluded. Other than an assistant minister who was sentenced to be exiled 3,000 li, the other 17 officials involved were all sentenced to death. This was the emperor's edict, and the evidence was irrefutable. No faction dared to speak out of turn, and no civil official dared to raise any objections. The Minister of Rights, Guo Yu, was also sentenced to death. He was the highest-ranking official to receive the death penalty since the founding of Qing Kingdom. When the news came out, the court was shocked. It was said that even the Empress Dowager went to the emperor's palace to plead for mercy. But after some gentle words from the emperor wiped away some of his tears and changed the sentence to hanging in prison, leaving Guo Yu's corpse intact. The Empress Dowager was sad and did not say anything more. Along with Guo Yu, there were 16 other officials who went to die. Raindrops slowly fell from the sky and landed on the ground of the usually busiest salt market in Jingdou. However, It still did not chase away the people of Jingdo, who had braved the rain to watch the execution. 16 officials wearing white robes knelt on the wooden platform that had been set up earlier. Their clothes were long stained with blood. Presumably, they had suffered a great deal of torture. These officials, who used to be glamorous, now had defeated expressions. Their hair was messy and tangled. They looked wretched. No one knew what the Overwatch Council had done, but some of the stronger criminals forced their lifeless eyes open. They wanted to find their relatives among the crowd watching the execution. Their mouths opened wide, but they couldn't make a sound. Mu Tai, the agent of the First Bureau of the Overwatch Council, sat under the canopy, watching the scene in front of them. Mu Tai's face was expressionless, but the rest of the civil officials looked a little uncomfortable. Those criminals who were waiting to die under the execution platform were once their colleagues. They had enjoyed themselves on the pleasure boats and drunk with them at the banquet table. But now they had to watch them die in front of their eyes. The rain fell on the eaves of the restaurant next to the salt market and flowed down along the tiles, forming a small waterfall from the sky. There were many buildings here, so there were a dozen small waterfalls. They hit the stone floor like white dragons, making a pitter-patter sound. A high-ranking official stood up and announced the decree in a loud voice. However, he was interrupted by the pitter-patter of the small waterfalls, so he couldn't hear clearly. The surrounding crowd only saw his mouth move, but they didn't know what he was saying. Finally, the high-ranking official's expression became serious and he shouted, "Execute!" The surrounding people heard this word clearly and immediately became excited. They shouted and squeezed forward, wanting to be closer to the wooden platform and enjoy this rare scene. The executioner on the wooden platform spat and wiped the rain off his face. He put the broadsword behind his back and stepped forward. He extended his left hand and gently pressed the back of the first criminal's neck to confirm the location of the joint. He then roared and the light of the broadsword flashed. When the broadsword fell, it made a muffled sound like a sharp knife cutting through pork. With a swoosh, fresh blood sprayed out from the headless cavity and splattered far away. The criminal official's head fell dejectedly onto the wooden platform. It was as if it was still afraid of the Qing court's large knife. It rolled with a rumbling sound. Using the flow of the rain, it did not stop. It rolled to the side of the wooden platform and landed. Seeing a dazed, blood-stained head fall to their feet, the previously excited people of Jingdo took a big step back in fright. Where the head rolled, it left a bloody mark. However, when the rainwater washed over it, it quickly faded away without a trace. Only now did the people watching the execution let out a cheer. However, there were not many people cheering, and the cheers were not very orderly. It seemed a bit scattered. On the high platform, Mu Tai, who was sitting in the lowest chair and watching the execution, showed a look of displeasure. Immediately after, the executioner made another cut, and another head fell to the ground. Another beam of blood flew into the sky. Another cry of surprise. Another life was lost. There were a total of 3 executioners. In just a moment, 16 criminal officials were all beheaded, leaving behind a ground covered in blood and corpses. As the beheadings continued, the surrounding crowd gradually became bolder. The cheers grew louder and louder. In the end, when the head of the director of the Board of Rights was tragically separated from his body, the cheers shook the heavens. It scared the rain that filled the sky and made it float away. A few bailiffs from the capital government were busy looking for the head of the criminal official in the crowd. However, after searching for a long time, they could not find it. After a while, a black dog ran out of the crowd with a head in its mouth. Its sharp teeth were biting on the head's ear, and a pair of dog eyes darted around. The light in the dog's eyes made people feel cold for no reason. Woof! The black dogs, but was hit by the scabbard of the bailiff's knife. In pain, it let go of the head in its mouth. It whined a few times and jumped into the rain. In the following days, a series of actions took place. The Minister of Justice was exposed for taking bribes and bending the law. The Overwatch Council found gold and silver in his third aunt's courtyard, as well as prohibited items. This was reported to the court and transferred to the Supreme Court. He was stripped of his position, and demoted to a judge of Ijo. He was demoted from a first-rank minor to a seventh-rank minor. Ijo was far to the south, and there was a lot of miasma and heat. It was likely that the Minister of Justice, Han Ji-wei, would never return to the capital. On the surface, Imperial Censor Guozheng did not seem to be affected. However, the court still found an excuse to send him to Jiangnan. Although Jiangnan was a beautiful place, the Fourth Bureau of the Overwatch Council had people in Jiangnan. It was just a matter of when they wanted to do something to him. The civil officials in the court did not join together to attack the Overwatch Council because of their relationship with the Prime Minister. They also felt that the Overwatch Council had solid evidence and did not act too harshly. However, all the officials knew that this was revenge. This was the Overwatch Council's naked revenge for the incident in the hall of the Ministry of Justice, because of Commissioner Fan Xian, who was far away in the north. Revenge and counter-revenge, control and counter-control, until a tacit balance was reached in the end. This was the unchanging theme of the Qing officialdom over the past few decades. So no one expected that when the Overwatch Council and the Prime Minister's vengeance had stopped at a certain limit, the counterattack from Xinjiang and the Empress would still come so quickly. The young scholar mentioned earlier was He Zongwei, who could not participate in the spring examinations because of the death of his father. He was a student of scholar Tseng Wenxiang and had always been close to the Guo family. He did not expect to hear the explosive news in his hometown. The minister was waiting for death in prison, his family property confiscated, and his good friend Guo Baoquan was nowhere to be found. What angered He Zongwei the most was that the crown prince of the Eastern Palace did not lend a helping hand in this matter. The woman who entered the capital with He Zongwei had an even more bizarre background. She was Wu Boan's wife. Wu Boan was a strategist placed in the prime minister's manor by the eldest princess. Last year, he had persuaded the second son of the Lin family to join forces with Northern Qi in an attempt to assassinate Fan Xian on Yulan Street. As the prime minister, Lin Ruofu naturally hated Wu Boan, who had caused the death of his only normal son. Although Wu Boan had died early, the Wu family still had a lot of property in Shandong. The local officials were the prime minister's students. So in accordance with the wishes of the prime minister, they tortured the Wu family. In the short span of half a year, who knew how much silver they had raked in? Wu Boan's own son had been imprisoned for no reason and tortured to death. Although the woman was not literate, she knew that the prime minister was powerful and that the Wu family could not contend with him. But her heart was grieved by the tragic death of her son. She made up her mind and went to the capital alone, ready to file a complaint against the emperor. While resting outside the city, the poor woman coincidentally ran into He Zongwei, who was returning to the capital. He Zongwei was a smart man. After hearing this, he knew that there was a lot he could do. He comforted the woman, saying that he would find a way to seek justice for her. After entering the capital, He Zongwei used his connections with his teacher to temporarily settle Wu Bo in the manner of an old imperial censor. In those days, mysterious people would often come and go from the manor, gently asking Wu Bo about the details of the tragedy in her hometown. He Zongwei watched all of this with some indifference. Only when Lady Wu nervously asked him questions would he put on a smile and comfort her, saying that the righteous officials of the court were working on it, and that the prime minister would soon fall from power. The garden of the old imperial censor's manor was a bit run down. Standing behind the fake mountain, a trace of pride flashed across He Zongwei's face. He destroyed the secret letter from Xinjiang and thought about the officialdom of the capital after the prime minister's fall. He couldn't help but think of the prime minister's in-laws, Minister Fan, and of the somewhat cold and distant Miss Fan, and his heart warmed. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.